Welcome, everybody. My name is Katie Fahrenbacher. I'm a journalist. I'm going to be guiding you through today's program. Gorgeous venue, right? We're running a little bit behind schedule, but we'll get back on track. The last time I was in this room and on this stage was back in 2009. Silicon Valley's interest in clean tech had kind of reached a frenzied pace. President Obama had just been elected. He had his green stimulus package. And Congress was debating the idea of a national cap-and-trade program. So what a different world we live in today, right? But the world today still has a lot of promise and opportunity, and that's what we're going to talk about today at this event. So I wanted to officially welcome you all to the Climate is Big Business event. Today we're going to focus on looking at clean energy and the booming clean energy economy. In particular, this event was organized by the Netherlands and California, and I want to thank you all for coming. In particular, the Dutch guests, some of whom have traveled very long distances to be here today. We're going to focus on the business opportunities and government policies that are leading to massive new industries for clean energy and sustainable transportation. Last year, $287 billion were invested in clean energy, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and the world saw record low prices for solar and wind. So today we're going to focus on this new climate economy, and we're going to bring together the California and Dutch approaches to climate business and put together new ideas and partnerships, and hopefully talk about future actions and learn best practices. You know, our regions have a lot in common, but there's a lot to learn from each other as well. And above all, we're both actively investing in stimulating our green economies and taking a leadership role in doing so. So today we're going to hear from some of the most important and influential minds on these topics. Folks like California Governor Jerry Brown, Netherlands Minister for the Environment Sharon Dijksma, energy policy guru Amory Levens, the director of the Netherlands Central Bank Frank Elderson, and the commissioner of the new climate economy Kristen Skogen Lund. A bit later, we'll hear from a group of business leaders, executives from Shell, PG&E, DSM, Adobe, and then we'll break out for lunch. There'll be some thematic tables that we ask you to check out. And then later in the day, we'll go into breakout sessions and do some deep dives on topics like smart mobility, the energy revolution, and financing the energy transition. And then finally, we'll come back together and reflect on some of these topics and new ideas we've discussed. And just a few more points of housekeeping before we hear from the governor. The Wi-Fi network is PT Events, a password strategy. And the Twitter hashtag for the day is going to be hashtag climate now. So when you're tweeting about that, please include that hashtag. Also, please remember to check out, we've got showcases outside with different innovative companies, and we want to invite visitors to come out and check those guys out. And we've got these interactive slides as well, which I introduced before, but they'll bring up questions, and we ask you to interact with these questions, and we'd love to get your feedback. And now I have the honor of introducing someone who has inspired so many of us in the room over the past several years, but particularly in recent months, to stand strong in the face of darker times in Washington when it comes to climate change and clean energy policy. His calls to action and his fighting words have electrified the counter movement, and now he's leading this issue on a world stage. He's the longest serving governor in California history, and of course, he is Jerry Brown.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I like the fog of San Francisco after the heat of Sacramento. It's a nice balance. It's kind of the balance between California and Washington. We know where the fog is, though, in that case, and where the sunlight is, which is shining in California. The clarity that we have about the dilemmas we're facing. By no means is California perfect. We have lots of issues of many, many kinds. And we have all the disputes that a vibrant democracy encounters. And as we look around the world, we see democracy is quite challenged in its attempt to govern with all the multiplicity of values and ideas and strongly held beliefs and identities. So things are not so easy, and they're not so easy in California. But in terms of these basic fundamental challenges, like climate change in our energy system, our mobility system, and everything that goes into this modern economy connected to making it sustainable. That's something that California is definitely writing point on. And it's not something that we just did last year or 5 years ago. California has been dealing with pollution of various kinds for a very long time. Probably, and I would say most certainly, the reason for that is the bad air pollution in Los Angeles that occurred, that was very obvious to my father when he was governor and to the person who succeeded him, Ronald Reagan. And I'm hoping that the inspiration of dense fog that works so well in California will have a similar impact in Beijing and Shanghai, and it appears to be doing that. China is increasingly becoming the leader in reducing pollutants in the environment. They have a long way to go, but they're investing hundreds of billions of dollars and showing the regulatory vigor that is willing to stand against powerful forces to get the job done. Now in California, the Earth Day, that some of you may remember, that took place, and Nixon signed the Clean Air Act, President Nixon, and Ronald Reagan was governor, and he made sure that California had a waiver so that California could impose more strict vehicle emission standards. Now, that was two Republicans working with a real problem called air pollution. And since that time, of course, the air has been dramatically cleaned up in Southern California and in California, even though we have far more cars. I mean, many more cars. I think we might have had, at the time, maybe 10 million cars. Now we have 22 million passenger cars, 33 million vehicles. It's been a real transition and an increase in the use of fossil fuel, but we've been able to clean things up. But the point I want to make is that this work can't be done by one candidate, one politician, one party. It takes an institutional, long-term political commitment. And based on that Clean Air Act in Washington and the California Air Resources Board that was created at the same time in California, California over these decades of governors of both parties have been able to build up, California has built up the expertise, the lawyers, the scientists, the engineers, the policy analysts in the Air Resources Board, such that I would say that the knowledgeable, trained people working on the problems of air pollution in California are probably more numerous and more coherent than what goes on in Washington under the Environmental Protection Agency. So we've got the people, and we happen to have the political will because we had a problem, and in response to a challenge, we get a response. I always was impressed with Arnold Toynbee's theory of history. Now, nobody believes in great theories of history anymore. That's kind of passé. But his theory was challenge and response. That's how civilizations rise and civilizations fall. And California, like China, has been challenged with serious air pollution, and we've responded. We're not done yet, but it's that interaction. Now, that challenge exists in Washington. It exists in the rest of the world, and responses are being made. And sometimes people slow down, sometimes there are setbacks, but if the challenge is real, then the response has to be real as well. So the challenge is not going away. There's no credible scientific report that says we can rest, we can relax. No problem. It was all a mistake. It was some professors trying to make money from grants, or I don't know how they figured that out. But whatever that charge was, it's not proving up. The academies of science, as everybody knows, but I like to repeat it, from China, Academy of Science of Japan, of Washington, America, Russia, Europe, everybody. They're all on board here. So the only question is, what do we do? And what are we willing to do? So here today we're going to talk about the efforts that each of you in your own ways can contribute. The Netherlands has been fantastic, been one of the early nations committed to our zero emission vehicles. And I can tell you, even though that's a small fraction, we have maybe 400,000 zero emission vehicles in California. It's a real thing. We've got to go further. And a few years ago, well, let's just take the utilities. Some of you representatives are here. It was just a few years ago that the electric utility leaders said we could not get to 20% renewable electricity by 2020. And now we're at 26, 27%, and we're on our way to 50% within a very short period of time. So the technology breakthroughs are there if the challenge is there, and the challenge is real. That is where I get my optimism. But we can't just let things happen. We got to make it happen. And so in California, we've passed laws to set renewable portfolio standards, emission standards. We have a cap that will constantly be reduced. And this is not some kind of amenity for the elite. We have to reduce the air pollution for all Californians, for all living things, because people are being damaged. And some parts of California being damaged more than others. So this is about human health, human well-being, particularly among vulnerable people, young and the elderly. So we got to make the investment. And yes, the investment is, we're talking billions and billions. But that's what life's all about. Life is not just about an abstract gross domestic product. You have to look inside, what is that? And that has to be about a quality of life that works for all of us. And that's what the environmental efforts are about, and that's the environmental policies of California. And we are promoting to the maximum degree zero emission vehicles. We're moving too slow in terms of the percentage that are being produced every year, but we're going to find ways that will be announced relatively soon. We're going to become more aggressive in promoting zero emission vehicles, energy efficiency in buildings, in our land use policies. In every way we can, we want to summon our creativity, our capital, our energy to make California on the side of a sustainable climate. And we're not there yet. And the rest of the world isn't there. So we need to encourage each other. Business has to see what it is. And there are a lot of business people who are not worried. There are a lot of business people who are very aware and very committed. So far, this is not the biggest issue that people talk about. If you listen to the debates in Washington, or even the debates that are in Sacramento over the weekend, climate change is not grabbing the headlines, but it is grabbing the change that's affecting our physical environment. So the physical reality and its changes due to climate change, or due to the causes that are causing climate change, are not stopping. So we got to get on board, and we got to do stuff. And so whatever can be, whatever we can think of, whatever we can contribute, we have to rise to the occasion. And it's not the most exciting thing in terms of politics. I mean, one thing I know a lot about is politics. I know what issues get people all excited and galvanize, and dealing with the technical issues of what it takes to deal with this problem. It's challenging. But the big benefit here, the reality that is helpful, is this is a real problem. There's a lot of problems in politics that are invented. The people on the outs have to get a problem that they can blame on the ins so they can be in. And as soon as they're in, the people that are now out got to figure out how they get in. So lots of little crises and problems and scandals and other things are invented. They're not, there's some reality usually to it. But the most real problem is the fact that heat-trapping gases are building up. And that's having global impact that's going to make everything worse for humanity. And what we see in Syria, or we see in other parts of the Mediterranean or other parts of the world, it's all going to be exacerbated by drought, by flood, by extreme weather events, by the moving of vectors of disease. This is real stuff. And the fact that some of the worst consequences are over the horizon doesn't mean we shouldn't be dealing with it. And the real takeaway is if you wait till something is absolutely clear, your options are very few. If you can sense and see what's up ahead early enough, then the action you take will be easier to manage and a lot cheaper. So there's no free lunch here, there's no escape. If we dawdle along and Congress doesn't do what it should do and the president doesn't take the action, probably they'll be thrown out in 2 years anyway, or 4 years, whatever it'll take. But then we'll just have to spend more money. It's almost like fixing the roads. If you don't want to fix them, you wait, and then you have to pay even more. So it's one of those problems that you got to take care of. And when you don't take care of, the cost goes up, and the difficulty goes up, and the wrenching of the political system gets worse. So right now, things are relatively civilized in the climate change debate. That's not going to be forever. You're going to get one group, against another. It's going to get, as I like to quote my famous quote that I like from Thomas Hobbes, which I can say in Latin, bellum omnium contra omnes, which means war of all against all. That was the state of nature before we got the Leviathan, called the state. And I'm in charge of the Leviathan, because that's the state. And we keep everything in order. If we weren't around, then you have a war of all against all. Well, that's where we're headed if we don't deal with climate change. And we got to deal with it a lot more than we're dealing with it now. And that's change at the state level, the city level, the national level, the global level, and the personal level. It's all of that. So wherever you are, you can do something. And I'm just glad you're here and committing yourself to that. And I'm glad we're working so closely with the Netherlands, because we're in the forefront. We have a long way to go, but we're ahead of a lot of other people. So I don't know how that makes you feel. But the point is, take action now and get it done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor Brown, for your strong words. And I think with your help and inspiration, we're ready to rise to the challenge. And before you leave, we'd like to invite the minister up on stage. Sharon Dijksma, she's the Netherlands Minister for the Environment, a longtime politician. She's been in Parliament since the age of 23. No, I'm going to let you guys take it away after this.
Only 1 minute.
But she's going to present you with a national icon.
Yes, Governor, we have a little present for you. I know that there are lovely sequoias here all over California, and trees are so important for all of us. But we have a national icon, and that is a tree which is growing with 99% less water than we're used to. So that is something which really could help us out when it comes to climate change. So we have some of them over here. I'm not going to hand them out because they're totally heavy, I suppose. But then you know that it's here for you, and we just are very proud of this national icon.
It's a real tree?
It's a real tree. It's alive. It is. So thank you very much.
I'll plant it.
Yes. Well, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something that happened 18 years ago. Perhaps you still remember it. What is going on here? Steve Jobs shouted in 1992, actually, at the unveiling of the first iBook with Wi-Fi. He passed the laptop through a hula hoop. There were no wires, but it stayed connected. The audience went wild. It was a magical moment. Wireless internet was born. But you might be thinking, why am I telling you this story? 2 years earlier, a Dutchman called Kees Links had come to see Steve Jobs. He proposed a standard to connect devices to one another wirelessly. There was only one problem. He didn't have any products to use it on, but Apple did. So he asked Steve Jobs if he was interested. He'd already been to lots of other computer companies, and Apple was the only one that accepted straight away. A new era had dawned, the one we're living in today. This is only one of the many examples of productive partnership between the Netherlands and California. We enjoy long-standing ties. Many Californian farmers have Dutch roots. Their relatives came here to make their dreams a reality. And it's that tradition of being pioneers, pushing boundaries and strengthening one another that unites us to this day. That's why it's so great to be here, with many Dutch businesses and institutions and the ambition to make climate change our business. I'm here also on behalf of my European colleagues. The European Union feels great affinity with California's approach to climate change. We're already benefiting from one another's knowledge and ideas. The first Tesla in Europe was driven on Dutch roads. The world's second Apple robot, Liam, is in the Dutch city of Breda, dismantling 1.2 million iPhones a year. Waterbox, a Dutch invention, allows trees, tomatoes and vines to flourish in the Californian heat. And let's not forget that the best album of the Beach Boys is called Holland. In his State of the State address at the start of the year, Governor Brown said, and I quote, "We can do much on our own, and we can join with others, other states and provinces, and even countries, to stop the dangerous rise in climate pollution." End of quote. I wholeheartedly agree. Time is of the essence. We must act now. We can't let Paris slip through our fingers, and that's why we are here. The Netherlands and the EU support the climate policy California has consistently pursued over the last decades. And you're staying the course, despite strong headwinds coming from the east. I greatly admire your courage and your determination. You inspire us to step up our own efforts, together with businesses, cities, scientists, and civil society organizations. In other words, with all of you, you're connected to the issues, to the community, and to the solutions. Paris wasn't just about sending a political message that we must combat climate change. It was about showing that we can. Many businesses don't think it's happening fast enough. Multinationals are pushing governments to do more. And in the US, where thousands of companies are asking for climate measures to be continued. And in my country, where scientists and multinationals want clarity on climate policy, and fast. The fact that Shell is asking for higher carbon pricing speaks volumes. I'd like to add 2 further points. First, The idea of climate change as a business case is becoming more and more attractive. Look at the drop in clean energy prices. The governor was also mentioning this. We are at a real turning point. We're certainly seeing this in the Netherlands. Right now, we are building the world's biggest offshore wind farm. By 2023, it will power 5 million households. A few years ago, we thought we'd need to subsidize this project with 5 billion euros. But in the current market, all we need is 0.3 billion. And within 7 years, we will expect we'll need no more grants at all. Second, climate change is a driving force for jobs. Climate policy creates employment. In the Netherlands, according to McKinsey & Company, strong climate policy will create 45,000 new jobs. In the US, there are 2.5 times more jobs in the sustainable sector than in the fossil fuel industry. And that's vital, because we must offer new prospects to people whose jobs are at stake. The concerns of miners and oil rig workers are justified. Climate policy must have a social component. So I want to create the best conditions, bring parties together, open doors through cooperation agreements, and make results more visible. And the good thing is that it's working. 6 months ago, I held a national climate conference themed Bring Paris Home. Representatives of the private sector, government and civil society organizations agreed to reduce carbon emissions by 17.6 megatons. That's the equivalent to the emissions of 2.2 million households or 7 million private cars. A broad collaborative approach is also having international success, as we can see here today. Since 2013, the Netherlands and California have been working together closely on the climate, the environment, and zero-emission transport. In fact, the world sees us as front runners in electric transportation. Our partnership is also creating other tangible results. For instance, California is interested in SolarRoad, Dutch technology that uses road surfaces to generate solar power. You certainly, I would say, have enough sun, although not today. The rest of the week there will be. And there is our new joint investment fund for sustainable startups. Together with the business community, we're going to invest tens of millions in this project. And this was one of the aims we set out in late 2013, and now, today, it's already a reality. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would say we do not only talk the talk, we also walk the walk. So I'm happy to reinforce and renew our partnership by signing our new cooperation agreement. We're beginning a new chapter in our shared fight against climate change, and the Netherlands and California can support each other as well as other states and countries when it comes to climate issues. We can do this by showing, in many different ways, that climate policy truly is big business. So to conclude, let's keep pushing boundaries and taking up opportunities like true pioneers. Maybe we'll have as much impact as when the Dutch Wi-Fi met the Californian Apple. Maybe we'll shout out, "What is going on here?" like Steve Jobs did 18 years ago. There is one difference. We're not on the verge of a new era. We are already in it. Thank you very much.
Minister Dijksma, and thank you for your leadership on carbon policy and the clean energy economy. The Minister and Governor Brown are going to step out for a moment to go to a meeting. But We're now going to hear from someone who spent the past 40 years working on energy policy and research. He's authored 31 books and 600 papers and co-founded Rocky Mountain Institute, a nonprofit that focuses on shifting the world from fossil fuels to efficiency and clean energy. I'm sure most of you know his name. It is, of course, Amory Lovins.
Goedemorgen, geachte dames and heren. Thank you for the honor of sketching some context about the energy transformation that we are all creating together. I'm assuming that this is supposed to be only on the side screens and not also on the front screen. Oh well. Energy savings deliver more global energy services than oil. In the United States since 1975, they have saved 30 times as much cumulative energy as all renewables have added. But efficiency is just getting started. In 1975, US government and industry all insisted that the energy needed to make $1 of GDP could not fall. A year later, I heretically suggested it could drop 72% in 50 years. So far, it's dropped 56% in 41 years, and yet just the innovations already made by 2010 can save another threefold, twice what I originally thought, at a third the real cost. And 7 years later, that looks conservative. That's partly because optimizing vehicles, buildings, and factories as whole systems can often make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. Such integrative design is how our Empire State Building retrofit saved 38% of its energy with a 3-year payback. But 3 years later, our cost-effective Denver retrofit saved 70%, making this half-century-old federal office more efficient than the best new US office, which in turn is less than half as efficient as our own new net positive no mechanicals office. And yet its technologies existed over a decade ago. What is mainly improved is not technology, but design, the way we choose and combine technologies. Similarly, super-efficient public housing retrofits will soon be financeable entirely from saved energy while extending building life and improving amenity, health, and value. The whole house retrofit package from the Netherlands has even been demonstrated to be installable in a single day while you're off at work. In industry and buildings, too, low-friction pipe and duct design could save roughly half the world's coal-fired electricity with extremely juicy returns, and yet such a rearrangement of designers' metal furniture remains largely unnoticed because it's not a technology, it's a design method, forgotten since the Victorian era. Now, both technology and design are moving efficiency into fast forward. Prior lighting improvements are being swept away as LEDs in each decade get 30 times more efficient, 20 times brighter, 10 times cheaper. Saving an eighth of the world's electricity, they're stressing electric utilities, which since 1892 have sold electricity as a commodity, not the services customers want like hot showers and cold beer. So efficient use doesn't cut utilities' costs, it cuts their revenues. What else changes this fast? Well, LEDs backwards are PVs, photovoltaics, now less capital intensive than Arctic oil. In the past 5 years, their plummeting prices have made solar and wind power cost less than the fuel we feed into US power stations, that's the dashed lines at the bottom, often making old coal, gas, and nuclear plants shut down as uneconomic to run. Powerful disruptors are indeed converging on the electricity industry from at least 8 directions. And these 8 Pac-Men of the apocalypse move fast They don't just add, they exponentiate. They're not lone wolves, they hunt in packs. They multiply quickly. They can gobble half of utility revenues in the 2020s. And together they're creating an alien competitive landscape faster than most utility cultures can cope. 3 years ago, all central power plants were called dinosaurs. Too big, too inflexible, not even relevant for backup power in the long run. Who said that? Not Greenpeace. It was Union Bank of Switzerland. Now, it's usually a good idea to sell customers what they want before someone else does. And customers are figuring out that they can use less electricity more productively and more timely, produce their own, and even trade it with each other. For example, Dutch customers can buy renewable electricity directly from other customers on this peer-to-peer website of Van de Bron, literally from the source. Dolph is here somewhere. So a German utility executive friend of mine decided to buy his electricity from the guy in the upper left photo because the price was right and he liked the cute piglet. And then he got a handwritten Christmas card from his electricity supplier. So what big utility can hope to compete with such customer intimacy? Now, U.S. wholesale electricity prices are now widely undercut by both wind power and solar power, and even without their temporary subsidies, generally smaller than the permanent subsidies to non-renewables, unsubsidized wind and solar, which I've grasped as asterisks at the lower right, are now winning in global markets at or below 3 US cents per kilowatt hour. In a single year, Mexican solar power prices just fell 37%, and European offshore wind prices 43%. When renewables get cheaper, of course, we buy more. Then they get cheaper, then we buy more. No wonder 55% of last year's global generating capacity additions were renewable. And yet we're still told that only coal, gas, and nuclear stations can keep the lights on because they're 24/7, while wind power and PVs are variable and hence supposedly unreliable. But variable doesn't mean unpredictable. Here's how accurately the French grid operator in a stormy winter month forecast a day ahead the actual output of the country's wind farms a day later. I'll bet they wish they could forecast demand that accurately. And indeed, we built the grid precisely because no generator is 24/7. They all break. And when a giant plant breaks, you can lose 1 billion watts in milliseconds, often abruptly, often for weeks or months. Grids were built to manage this intermittence by backing up failed plants with working plants. And in exactly the same way, but often at lower cost, grids can manage the forecastable variations of solar and wind power by backing up those variable renewables with a portfolio of other renewables, all forecasted, integrated, and diversified by type and by location. So in Texas, whose grid has no big hydro dams and is not connected to the rest of the United States, a 2050 summer weeks expected loads can get much smaller and less peaky with efficient use. Then we can make 86% of the annual electricity with wind and PVs, and 14% from dispatchable renewables. This 100% renewable supply can then match the load by putting the surplus electricity into two kinds of distributed storage that are worth buying anyway: ice storage, air conditioning, and smart charging of electric autos. Then we can recover that distributed storage when needed, fill the last gaps with unobtrusively flexible demand, and only about 5% of the annual renewable output is left over, so the economics should be juicy. This is not just a theory. Some grid operators do this today. In 2014, Germany was meeting 27% of its annual electricity needs from renewables, Italy 33%. But 4 other European countries with modest or no hydropower met about half their electricity needs from renewables, adding no bulk storage and with superior reliability. Indeed, for Denmark and Germany, about 10 times better than America's reliability. In 2015, the ultra-reliable former East German utility, 50 Hertz, got 49% of its electricity from renewables, 3/4 of them PVs and wind. So these operators have learned to run their grids the way a conductor leads a symphony orchestra. No instrument plays all the time, but the ensemble continuously makes beautiful music. Now, electric vehicles will make power grids more flexible while saving money, oil, air, and climate. Their global sales grew 60% in 2015, 42% in 2016. In that year, China sold more than the world sold in 2014, and it launched 5 years of further tenfold growth. Respected forecasts of disruptive oil savings set to recrash world oil prices in 6 or 8 years do not yet count India and Germany and the Netherlands targeting 100% electric vehicles by 2030, and they don't fully count, if at all, 4 accelerators of EV growth that are now in play, namely ultralighting, which saves up to 2/3 of the costly batteries, Febates, which help make 1/3 of Norway's new cars electric, 50 times the US share, and they're running in 5 other countries, plus soon India, repaying up to half of the total cost of electric vehicles by monetizing their value to the power grid, and new mobility business models that strongly favor electric traction. Now, as batteries nearly 4-fold, or GM says 5-fold, price drop in the past 5 years continues, EVs in the 2020s are going to cost the same as today's gasoline cars. And their production and volume implies abundant cheap batteries, distributed solar everywhere, gas industry distress, and a far more flexible grid. EVs become cheaper and can spread much faster if we first make autos 2 or 3 times more efficient. The carbon fiber electric cars that I invented 25 years ago, we designed 17 years ago, and Toyota used our methods 10 years ago to design as a 3-fold lighter plug-in hybrid. Those entered the market in 2013. In fact, the one I drive, a carbon fiber electric car, is already profitable, and its carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries. An improved manufacturing process my team developed and sold to a Tier 1 can now make a complex 2x2 meter carbon fiber part in 1 minute. And making all US autos this way would save 1.5 Saudis or half an OPEC worth of oil at a cost under $10 per saved barrel. That's because the ultralighting is paid for by a 2/3 smaller propulsion system and by radically simpler automaking with 80% less investment. Indeed, 2 changes in technology plus 3 in business models are rapidly morphing autos from PIGs, personal internal combustion gasoline steel-dominated vehicles, to SEALs, shareable electric autonomous lightweight service vehicles. And meanwhile, as China and India radically speed the global mobility revolution, the US is nearing peak car ownership in the next few years. IT-enabled public transit is rapidly improving. Cities are starting to get redesigned around people, not cars, yielding the same access with 2/3 less driving and 1/3 less concrete. So even without those latest innovations, just by combining vehicle building and industrial efficiencies, our 2011 business book, Reinventing Fire, rigorously showed how to triple US efficiency and quintuple renewables by 2050, when we would need no oil or coal or nuclear energy and 1/3 less natural gas, while saving $5 trillion, growing the economy 2.6-fold, strengthening national security, and cutting fossil carbon emissions by about 84%. And yet this would need no new inventions and no acts of Congress, but with smart city and state policies, as in California, could be led by business for profit. So far, this transition is on track in the marketplace. These best buys also happen to be the most effective solutions to big global problems that hazard every country's security and prosperity. And if you like any of Reinventing Fire's outcomes, you could support this transition without needing to like every outcome or to agree about which outcome is most important. So focusing on outcomes, not motives, can turn gridlock and conflict into a unifying solution to our common energy challenge. Now, stimulated by those US findings, at the G20 8 months ago, China's National Development and Reform Commission published its roadmap for China's energy revolution, aided by Berkeley Lab, Energy Foundation China, and Rocky Mountain Institute. And this foundational strategy document details how China can save about $3.5 trillion, run a 7-fold bigger economy in 2050 than in 2010 while using only as much energy as today, but 7 times more productively, shift supply 2/3 off fossil fuels, emit 42% less carbon, burn 80% less coal, and get 13 times more GDP from each ton of fossil carbon. If we extrapolate these on-track US findings and adopted Chinese findings to the other half of the world, cross-checking against similar European results, the world could achieve about a 2 Celsius degree climate trajectory while providing the same or better energy services about $18 trillion cheaper, net present value. Reinvesting in natural systems carbon removal could then get to about a 1.5 degree trajectory, still with trillions of dollars left over, plus huge hidden benefits. Making climate protection not costly but profitable should simplify the politics. Now, as the energy value proposition transforms, markets can flip with breathtaking speed. On Fifth Avenue in New York, in 1900, you have to look hard for the first car. 13 years later, you have to look even harder for the last horse, if there even is a horse in that picture. And the horse and buggy industry thought it had many decades to adapt, but Henry Ford's Model T got 62% cheaper in 13 years. Car-owning households soared from 8 to 80% in a decade, 3/4 of them financed by newfangled car loans. Today, PV modules just got 80% cheaper in 5 years. 3/4 of our rooftop solar in California is innovatively financed. Ford's and Edison's industries are merging. So today's horse and buggy industries are forgetting that the pace of transformation is set not by incumbents but by insurgents, uninhibited by the incumbents' business models or legacy assets or cultures. As Jack Welch said, if the rate of change on the outside is greater than the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. Investors, though, flee even before customers do because capital markets keenly sniff out disruption. And once they think you're in or even headed for the toaster, they don't wait for the toast to get done before they decapitalize you and invest in your successors. That's already happening. So this energy transformation that I've summarized for you is not just fundamental, it's elemental. The first industrial revolution was the age of carbon, creating our prosperity and the world's mightiest industries, from coal and oil and gas. But now that obsolete age of carbon is giving way to the modern age of silicon. Silicon microchips, telecommunications, software turn people from isolated to networked and systems from dumb to smart. Silicon power electronics make electricity interconvertible and precisely applicable, replacing fiery molecules with obedient electrons. And silicon solar cells enable the ascent of energy from mining the fires of hell to harvesting the breath and radiance of heaven. Thank you all for your good work and your kind attention. Dank u wel.
Thank you so much, Amory. Appreciate that. Excellent thoughts. We're excited to hear from you. All right. Next, we are going to hear from Frank Elderson. He's been an executive director at the Netherlands Central Bank since the summer of 2011. There he is. And he's going to talk about his 5-point call to action. The stage is yours.
Thank you. I'm very glad I can say Excellency. No problem. I have a confession to make. I'm a banker. Not just a banker, but a supervisor of banks, a central banker. And you might ask yourself, what on earth is somebody like him doing at a conference like this? After all, my industry is very much known for gray, not for green. Concerned with greenbacks instead of green banks. Pinstripes, not pine trees. But today I'd like to talk to you about why the smart money is indeed on green finance. Why we have to take the challenges together and why we need to make these sustainable development goals work. Today I would like to reach out to you and give you some insights on what we have learned as a central bank. Because most of these issues we think are not just confined to the financial sector. And first I would like to explain why you should focus on sustainability. 20 years ago, many a company would often only go green for reputational reasons. But today there are other reasons. You cannot afford to ignore sustainability. Sound risk management means the financial sector needs to worry about sustainability risks. We simply cannot sit back, because we have reached a stage where the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of action. Suppose you've made major investments in high carbon assets. These assets have retained their value for many years in the past. But we can just assume that they might not in the future. During the transition to the low carbon economy, these assets could become unwanted or obsolete, and we have just heard so well explained, as new, cleaner and cheaper energy replaces them. And this audience is full of disruptors that work day and night to bring about that very transition. Under these new developments and maybe even new laws limiting the use of fossil fuels, old forms of energy may even need to stay in the ground. And these valuable assets, you know the terminology, would become stranded. And the financial sector mentions that as being the carbon bubble. And we must make sure that the big green bang that we are presently experiencing does not cause this carbon bubble to burst. So be aware of the risks and manage them properly. But beside risks, a more sustainable economy also offers us many, many opportunities. We are seeing this happening right now in the financial sector, where the issuance of green bonds is growing very fast. But it is, of course, also evolving amongst other sectors and in all continents. While it is clear that the business community needs to take on the risks and the opportunities related to sustainability, it is less clear how it should go about this. Usually, the first thing that companies want is a strategy. Now, if we want to combat climate change and to bring about a more sustainable economy, wouldn't it be wonderful if all these individual company strategies were to be somehow be aligned with a wider, broader world strategy? Wouldn't it actually be wonderful if we had a world strategy? If we are all, after all, in the pursuit of happiness, if all men and women are created equal, not just us, but also future generations, then actually we urgently need a world strategy. Well, fortunately, we already have one. It's called the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And keeping that in mind, a suggestion I would give to companies is innovate while using what's already there, looking at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And do that together. Join a platform, cooperate, form strategic alliances, get an overview of what is happening, connect with others, and looking at this audience today, that is very much what you're already doing now. An example from the Dutch financial sector, the Netherlands Banking Association has recently launched a public consultation document proposing how the Dutch banking sector can support a number of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Businesses could follow suit by launching a similar initiative. And we, at the Dutch Central Bank, we cooperate on this matter as well. We are part, for example, of the G20 Green Finance Study Group and of the European High-Level Group on Sustainable Finance. Now, this is a very mouthful, but it is an interesting group which has been mandated by the European Commission to come up by the end of this year with a strategy as to how the European Commission can change financial regulation, all the financial regulation in the EU, and turn that more green. An interim report will be out in about 6 weeks' time, and if you want to have the opportunity to directly influence EU policy, then you are kindly invited to put your observations in the website in this consultation. Using our convening power, That's really wonderful if you work for a financial supervisor. If you invite banks and pension funds, for example, they always come to you. So using our convening power on a national level, we have created a cross-sectoral platform for sustainable finance, bringing together representatives from all over the financial sector and a number of relevant ministries, and stimulating the creation of working groups that take on a range of sustainable finance issues. One of these working groups is on SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, impact measurement, and consists of several Dutch insurers, pension funds, and banks, together with major multinationals such as Philips and Unilever. And their goal is to develop a methodology that will allow them to assess the impact on the SDGs of any investments that they make. If investors around the world start doing this on a large scale, you can only imagine what the effect it will have on companies that cannot deliver sustainable goods or services. This illustrates that one area where the Netherlands is a frontrunner is impact investment. Impact investment is all about seeking measurable social and environmental benefits alongside financial returns. And the Dutch financial sector is a global leader in this field. It helps create opportunities for investors wanting to generate a positive impact through their investments. As for the energy transition, the rate of change is a very important element for the financial sector. For the energy transition to succeed and cause as little damage as possible to our economies, it must proceed as orderly and gradually as possible. And this will allow companies and financial institutions to have enough time to adapt and to make the right investments. And this means that governments should start taking the appropriate measures to put us on a path which is smooth and gradual. It is also crucial that we cooperate internationally on carbon goals. The Global Climate Change Agreement that was signed in Paris is, of course, a very important first step. But we also need, and I think the Minister already mentioned that, an effective carbon price. If the cost of carbon reflects the real cost to society caused by carbon emissions, immediately green projects will have positive business cases and brown projects will no longer be profitable. An effective carbon price is the single most powerful tool we have in greening our societies, economies, and financial sectors. At the Dutch Central Bank, we are currently researching the effects of an increase in the carbon price on the different sectors in the economy. Nations and regions should and could also develop climate laws in order to provide investors with more security about long-term developments, helping them to incorporate these long-term issues into their investment decisions. Climate is too important to depend on the volatility of all too short political cycles. This long-term clarity will foster the much-needed surge of investment in sustainable projects. Since the energy transition is one of the biggest challenges we face this century, cooperation between government and the market is also crucial, as we have learned in the Netherlands, and it is also possible. To just give you one example, the Dutch government recently introduced a new law requiring all office buildings to have an energy label of at least C by 2023. And what we have noticed is that the financial sector then, by only that one thing that the government did to set a deadline, immediately reacted. Banks start writing letters to their customers saying, well, you own this office building. This office building is not going to have C if you don't do this investment. What is your plan? If you don't have a plan, we as a financial institution can actually help you and make sure that you get to C. If you are at a C level, then C as in ABC, not C as the C level. Then by 2023, you will have real estate that is still marketable. So there you see, the only thing that the government did was setting that deadline, and then suddenly the private sector steps in and comes with solutions, and they do this fast. All right, so far I've spoken about the importance of sustainability, how business community can get involved with sustainability, why it is important to start now, and how the market and the government can complement each other. But before I finish, I would also like to show you the impact of one single word. A few years ago, as we joined, maybe 6 years ago it was, as we joined as a new board of the directors of the Dutch Central Bank, we changed our mission statement by adding one word. And now the first sentence reads, DNB, that's the central bank, seeks to safeguard financial stability and thus contributes to, and there is the word, sustainable prosperity in the Netherlands. I think that at least then, and maybe still now, we are the only central bank that has in its mission statement this sustainability word and concept. Now, of course, this was controversial at the time, and maybe sometimes still is. People say, well, are you a central bank or are you an NGO? And what we say, well, you know, we have, as an institution, we have existed for 200 years. And so we take a long-term view. And believe me, we as supervisors in central banks, we love the word long-term. It's in our genes. It is our business to make sure, after all, that if an insurance company, if you pay premiums today, that if your house burns down in 20 years, they will actually pay. It is our job to make sure that pension funds that you contribute to when you start working, maybe when you're 24, that half a century later, you will still get your benefits, long term. So what we have tried to do is to actually go through the whole portfolio of all our tasks and all our actions and see how we can actually put flesh on the bone of that one word, sustainability. And if you choose that word right, it can set in motion a whole lot of things. And if you are a leverage organization, which we are, as I said, when we call upon the Dutch financial sector, there are many, many billions of euros that can be shifted from coal to wind, if you like. Then I think that there might even be a moral obligation to use that leverage. I have a statement to make. I'm a banker. I'm not just a banker, but a central banker. But apart from a banker, I'm also a citizen. I'm also a father, and I'm also a fellow traveler on the spaceship Earth. Sustainability is indeed a core business of a central bank. But I think this holds true for all of us. By its very definition, we will not be able to survive in an unsustainable world. And forgive me, one last thing, and I'll show you why. I'm still a lawyer a little bit. I was looking at the U.S. Constitution, and already the framers of the U.S. Constitution, they knew the importance of long-termism. They said, in order to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity, the framers considered this concept so important that they put it in the very first sentence just before the first article, posterity, sustainability. So let me finish off by just 5 small points. Cooperate. Manage risks, seize opportunities, be inspired by the Sustainable Development Goals, and start now. And since this is an audience of people that have already started, I would say continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. We've got a lot to learn from you guys in the U.S. All right, next we are going to hear from Kristen Skogen Lund. She's the commissioner of the New Climate Economy. I think we're going to be hearing from her over video. The New Climate Economy is an international initiative to examine how countries can achieve economic growth while dealing with the risks posed by climate change.
Hello, everyone, and a warm greeting from Oslo. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I'm very happy to have the opportunity to address you through this video clip. And let me start by asking you the following question. If you had to choose between a healthy planet and a healthy economy, which one would you choose? Well, there is now ample evidence that we don't have to make that choice. The Global Commission on the Economy and Climate, of which I am a member, has been working on these issues for the last 4 years. And for 3 years straight now, we see that the global economy has grown while energy-related emissions have been stable. So there is evidence now that we can achieve economic growth and climate action together. And renewable energy is now one of the most dynamic employment sectors. And in Norway, almost 70% of our final energy consumption comes from renewable sources. And together with California, we are leading in the use of electric vehicles. So all over the world, I would say that the private sector is now really waking up to all the opportunities of a low-emission society. And to further boost that development, we need also to change the financial culture. We need the financial culture to emphasize sustainable long-term investment instead of the narrow focus on short-term gains. We need better climate disclosure in our financial system. And finally, we need to scale up and standardize new tools, as, for example, green bonds. So now we know that the choice is not between a healthy planet or a healthy economy. The choice is between action and inaction. The choice is between seizing all the dynamic opportunities or being left behind. So I urge us all to make the right choices and move in the right direction. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So let me just quickly say hello. Erik Olsen. I'm with Business for Social Responsibility. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're 25 years old. We work with about 275 companies, almost all of them multinationals, a good healthy dose of them from the Netherlands, but many from other countries as well. And I'm going to be inviting some panelists up to talk about something very near and dear to our heart, which is corporate activism and corporate action on climate change. This is something that has absolutely exceeded our expectations over the last several years. It was building before that, but I think a number of factors have converged to produce a lot of energy, a lot of commitment, and a lot of action in the corporate sector that really upended a lot of people's expectations. And just a quick story, even before the political events of the last year in the UK and in this country, this trajectory of action, the role of business, was already under great change. And when we were in Paris now a year and a half ago for the climate summit, and certainly in Marrakesh this year, there's a lot of energy in the system around what the UN calls the non-state actors. And so that's states. We had the wonderful example of California in front of us this morning, but also cities, and last but not least, the private sector. And indeed, during this period of great change, what we've seen from our seat is continued action. We now have more than 200 large companies who've committed to or established what we call science-based targets. So these are aggressive, absolute reduction targets that are in accordance with what the IPCC says we need to achieve. So major, major cuts. We see ongoing collaborative action. We are together with Amory's organization, Rocky Mountain Institute, World Wildlife Fund, and WRI. We have a group called the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. We literally have hundreds of companies working either towards 100% renewable goals or to major purchases of increased share on their way to that. We have the We Mean Business Coalition, which we're a member of, which together with 7 other organizations put literally a few thousand companies together, and we're advising on policy and trying to provide not only air cover, but hopefully inspiration for government negotiators in Paris. And we're now hard at the work on implementation behind this, which has never been more important. So we've got a treat for you in terms of a panel. We've deliberately put together a group of people and companies that are about as diverse as you could get. You'll see what I mean in just a second, and I'll be confirming who was able to show up. I know we had one regret, which was Marina from Philips, who had a family issue come up. She was not able to join us. But I'm going to ask to come up First, Hugh Welsh from Royal DSM, and Hugh, I believe, is the president for North America for Royal DSM. And I'm just going to have folks come up to start with, and when we get into discussion, I'll have you introduce yourself and company a little bit as we get into it. That'll save time. Then Michael Carr from Royal Dutch Shell. Come on up, Michael. Vince Dignio from Adobe. Vince, and I don't know if we were going to also have Ray Williams from PG&E on this panel, or whether that changed. We have Ray. I have not met you, Ray. Glad you're here. Excellent. So we've got health products, we've got oil and energy, we've got a utility, and we've got software. So I think we couldn't have mixed it up a lot more than that. What I'm going to do with the group is I'd like to go have the companies go through first and just give us quick background. What do you do? And let's go straight at the big question on the board. Why is climate big business to you? What is your major focus when you address this question of climate action? Is it about risk? Is it opportunity? Is it both? Why are you up on stage here talking with us about this? And then we'll get into a discussion after each of them has done that. Go ahead.
So I'm Hugh Welsh, I'm from DSM. Some of you may know DSM. The acronym stands for Dutch State Mines. And we started as a coal mining company 115 years ago in the province of Limburg in the Netherlands. And today we're essentially in every business there is, except for coal mining. And so, in addition to our business lines, I like to think of DSM as the perfect example of a fossil fuel company that has shown the capacity to make that evolution away from fossil fuels into new businesses. So today we're the world's largest nutritional ingredient company. We're a large medical device company. We make high specialty plastics for use in automobiles to make them lighter. We make fibers to make cars stronger. And we also work in clean energy. So we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign direct investment here in the United States to open up cellulosic ethanol facilities or to work on solar programs. And so for us, climate is big business, not just for the opportunity to generate revenue, but for us it's really about future-proofing our organization against the changes that will come. It's not if, it's will. It's an inevitability that we're going to face a price on carbon. It's an inevitability that societies and businesses alike are going to have to address the impacts of climate change. So for DSM, this is a strategic imperative to future-proof our organization so that we're here 115 years from today. Probably having evolved and transformed into completely new businesses, but that's okay too. So in a nutshell, that's DSM.
Back into coal, maybe. Clean coal.
Unlikely. Okay. I've been in the mines, though. There's nothing clean about them.
All right. Great. Thank you for that. Michael, please.
Yes, Michael Carr. I'm our manager of California Business Coordination. So normally they don't let me out of the room. I'm in the back coordinating the various interests we have in the states. I think everyone knows that meeting the climate challenge is really important to Shell. And it's a big challenge to do that in a world that actually will require more energy while society strives in parallel to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So when you put those two together, climate is big business. And recognizing that a global approach is utmost to meeting this challenge, Shell remains a strong supporter of both the Paris Accord and the Under 2 MOU as frameworks. Many in the room may know that we recently reiterated that support as a signatory to the recent C2ES letter to President Trump that advocates we remain a part of that accord, which was further reiterated last week by our CEO in his interview with NPR when he was in Washington, D.C. So we're taking proactive steps to meet this challenge and continue to be an energy provider of choice to consumers. Here in California, we participate across the hydrocarbon value chain, providing fuel that the citizens need and will continue to need for the foreseeable future. We have that responsibility and we'll maintain it. We're proud we do it safely. We're proud we do it reliably and environmentally responsibly. We employ over 1,000 Californians in these roles. In addition to our refinery in Martinez, which is more well known, we have a number of folks in our energy office in San Diego. They provide gas power and environmental management products and enable the renewable energy economy. And we also have a recently opened San Francisco office for new energies, growing staff of people there who are working to develop and nurture our new energy platforms in California, including solar, electric mobility, and hydrogen for fuel cell electric vehicles. So we intend to develop, to build on those global capabilities, deepen our leadership role in the energy transition. For those who may not be familiar, the Shell Scenarios work, Mountains and Oceans, will illuminate how we go about doing that. If you're not familiar with those scenarios, Google Shell New Lenses, and it'll be the first return on a Google search if you want to dig into that more deeply. Given that we're cutting the panel, I'll stop there and pick up the rest.
We'll
of
have
the
more
points.
time to get into it.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael.
Hi, my name is Ray Williams. I'm Director of Climate Policy Analysis and Analysis at Pacific Gas and Electric Company. For those of you who may not know, we're a combined gas and electric company in Northern and Central California. We operate power plants. We buy a lot of power off of the market. We operate transmission and distribution facilities, both on the electric side and on the gas side. You know, our objective is to drive down the carbon intensity of our business up and down the infrastructure while meeting a diverse set of company needs and keeping bills affordable. We provided consistent policy support on the climate front since 2006 with the passage of AB 32. We were the first investor-owned utility to support that legislation. We've supported SB 350, SB 32. We are working with the California legislature and regulators on cap and trade extension legislation in Sacramento today. So very much engaged in the Clean Power Plan, and a longtime supporter of climate policy and driving down carbon intensity of our own business. It's actually now a really nice place to work in both our investment and our operations. From the leadership in California, they're unequivocal in their support of driving down carbon intensity. And frankly, it makes it a really fun place to work. In terms of some of the things we have done and we're doing on energy efficiency, we've had programs since 1976, which have reduced 180 million metric tons on a gross life cycle basis, for those of you who know energy efficiency better than I do. On renewables, we're ahead of schedule to meet a 33% renewable portfolio standard by 2020. So ahead on that front, that's turning into a very mature industry for sure. And we know that the unit cost of renewables has been going down, but it also has presented challenges in terms of integrating renewables. I think Amory alluded to this. And so this just becomes really the next challenge for a utility. We bring storage into the picture, we learn about storage, we see how it helps to operate an electric system when you're bringing that much variable generation into the market. Also on the electric vehicle front, we have a how-to on our website. It makes it easy for customers to apply for a rebate, to arrange for charging, to look at the best rate schedule given their pattern of electric use. We've also been successful in getting approval from the PUC for 7,500 EV charging points. This is the first phase. We anticipate seeing the market grow from there. And even on the natural gas side, we joined the EPA Methane Challenge. You know, that's a challenge to adopt best management practices to voluntarily reduce methane emissions beyond what's required in regulation. And finally, on the fleet EV side, we have 1,600 alternative fuel vehicles. Since about 2011, they've reduced greenhouse gas by about 40,000 metric tons. And we also have this sort of neat feature where the electricity is exportable, which means that when crews are out there doing maintenance or working on unplanned outage, they're able to reduce the duration of the outage. So this is an example of not only reducing carbon emissions, but helping reduce the duration of our customer outages. So there could be some real benefits when you bring that technology into new places. So in summary, we look to drive down emissions by keeping bills affordable. We invest where it makes sense, and we support investment by others in our service territory. And just as a final note, utility assets are long-lived assets. So not only what we invest in today is going to be around in 2030, it's also going to be around in 2050. So that means it's not just advisable, but it's necessary really to position the company for a low carbon future, because this infrastructure is going to be around for quite a while.
Thank you, Ray. Vince, please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Vince Dignaire. I'm the, I'm the sustainability strategist for Adobe. They call me the sustainability guy a lot of times. Even our C-level say, oh, that's a sustainability guy. So that's my title. I'm just going to say, first of all, I guess I represent Silicon Valley up here, and it's an honor to be here. I know that for all of our peers, we consider the Netherlands a true leader in this space. So thank you for having me. I'm going to start by addressing your question, I think, right away, which is, why is climate big business to you? And it'll help to give you a little bit of background on Adobe. So first of all, does everybody know what Adobe does? Okay, everybody used a PDF or Photoshop or something. That's the software my company does. And in 2013, I mean, Adobe's been around for approximately 30 years. And in 2013, our CEO had the strategy of transitioning everything to the cloud. So it went from a physical boxed product to 3 clouds. We now have Document Cloud, Creative Cloud, and Marketing Cloud. And what this did was it completely eliminated our physical supply chain. We have no physical supply chain, but we do have a digital one. And that digital one is data centers, it's server rooms on site, and it's our cloud and co-located data center partners. That represents a monstrous part of our business now. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at those boxed products being transitioned to the cloud, and we've used the Lawrence Berkeley Labs CLEAR method for doing this, but we figured out that the carbon footprint or the carbon impact reduction moving from the physical to the cloud was a 90% impact reduction. Just that transition. Thank you for shaking your head, Avery, so I needed to make sure that I got that right. And we've also sort of figured that if you're using it by mobile device, it's a 95% reduction in impact. So there's a huge transition in this. I mean, that represents good business. Now, how can I say that? Just in 2016 alone, we've grown our business, our revenue, 22%. We've also increased our workforce by 14%. So it's pretty clear that this cloud strategy has worked out for us. And a lot of people say, well, it's hard to decouple business or economic growth from carbon. And I say, are you kidding? If you reduce carbon, your business will grow, because that's my experience. And I think that we can say in general for a lot of our Silicon Valley peers who are along this line. Okay, now one important feature to this is that if I look back to 2002, between 2002 and now, we've reduced our overall emissions by 60%. All right, that's quite a lot. And a lot of it speaks exactly to what you were saying, Avery, about energy efficiency. So our global footprint is, the way I like to phrase this, 78% of our employees work in LEED certified workspaces. Our California, 2 of our campuses, our headquarters in San Jose and San Francisco, are both LEED Platinum. Now, you may argue, is that the best way to do it? But the fact of the matter is, it's energy efficiency. It's worked well for us. It saved us millions of dollars. We've had over 200 energy efficiency projects in that time span with a ROI of less than 3 years. I can't imagine an executive that would turn that down. So that's kind of the background for why I consider it to be good business.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. So what I want to do next is I want to take advantage of the great collective experience we have up here from very different sectors to ask the question in the current context about where we go now. And why do I say this? I say this because, first with the Brexit vote last year, certainly with our elections in this country, one of the questions that we field very often, almost every day still, is are we still moving forward? Is business still in this? What are the prospects? Is this going to slow down, whether this is renewable energy or some other element of our work? And our short answer is we see at least 2 different parts of the market. The kinds of companies that are out there already with public commitments, including the companies here on stage who've been working on this for a while, have very clearly and consistently and repeatedly said something on the order of now more than ever, now more than ever. So the commitments continue, a sense that, well, it looks like business is going to have to perform even more of a lead role than it thought. You know, the case for renewables for the reasons that Amory laid out so eloquently, that didn't change with the political election. So all these things say move, move, move. At the same time, there's a much larger number of organizations who weren't and aren't active. They were on the fence, and it's got to be true that under these conditions of political uncertainty and whatnot, that's going to be a harder group to grow. So given that, my question is to leadership organizations, companies, to those of you who've thought about it, what are the things that need to happen? The element of what makes the case stronger? Where does this need to be easier? Is it how we talk about these issues? So it can be policy, it can be further elements of business case. And anyone who'd like to offer it up, what's your secret ingredient for how we're going to have 50 companies on this stage the next time the Dutch call a meeting in San Francisco?
Yeah, I'm a corporate Darwinist. And so, you know, those companies that adopt these progressive policies, that have already embraced this and will continue to embrace it, will be those that survive. And those that don't will not. And so you may see 50 companies on the stage 10 years from now, but there might be 50 companies that haven't even been created yet.
Right.
All of us will be there, of course. You know, so for me, you know, we welcome the support of the government. I know we have a lot of government representatives here today, but we don't need the support of the government, I don't think, any longer. It's great to provide some direction, but more and more we're hearing from the analyst community, from the insurance community, from the shareholder community, all making demands on us to not only make these changes because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do from a financial perspective.
Yeah, I'd say my take would be, one, it's stay the course. There's some short-term noise. The crystal ball's gotten a bit murky. But if you look at the long-term trend lines, where we're heading isn't changing, and what may be going on the next 2-4 years isn't going to fundamentally change that trajectory. So we're staying the course. It's moving in that direction. I would agree that it's not, we don't need more help from the government. We need rules that allow the best solutions to come forward and offer industry, existing and future, the opportunity to bring the best solutions forward that can deliver what we need at the lowest cost and not unnecessarily constrain some of the solution set. So,
great, thank you.
You know, the notion of climate change itself is real. So when you get these bumps in the road like what you get in Washington, D.C. right now, and you have long-lived assets, you're still focused on the long-lived assets, and you're still focused on driving down carbon intensity. But I would say one thing that can be really helpful is our uniform markets, for example, a uniform power market, and then a uniform carbon market layered on top of that. And that provides everyone who's operating in that same market the same price signals. And I think that would really bring investment in without additional government help, and help people, you know, all through that market, you know, make the best decisions.
Good one.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Again, I'm going to take the position that I represent Silicon Valley companies. So for my Google, Cisco, Facebook friends that are out there, you can get after me if I don't represent you well. But what I'm going to tell you is that there's no one in the tech community that questions climate science. I mean, we're tech. We understand science. This is what's built our businesses. It becomes more a matter of how to address it. And one thing we know for sure is that if I look at those companies that I just mentioned, we don't compete with each other on product. We compete for talent. And what we know is that the talent coming out of universities and from the other companies around here expect our companies to have a stance on this and to take action on it. So what it's doing is you can see, like with groups, the Future of Internet Power Group that BSR organized, and the REBA with RMI, WRI, WWF, we all work together. We are peers and we talk to each other. We all try and be the tide that raises all ships. And in a case like this, I really think that collaboration is everything. It's helped us set science-based targets based on the UN guidance on climate change. We've set those this year. We've actually used it to implement our operational metrics. It's what is setting our KPIs for each site. And I know that a lot of our peers are approaching it in different ways, but I think this is really important, that we're all trying to look at it in terms of like, what can we do within our business to address this and attract talent and talk about it in a way that our employees can go out in their communities and do what they can to make a difference as well. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities in this sort of thing. The other piece of it too is if I look at all of our peers, for sure, and us, we've set 100% renewable energy goals. They're different for each company, and I'll just jump in with an Adobe perspective on this if you don't mind. So when I got to Adobe in 2013, a lot of great work had been done by my predecessors there. So I'm going to use an American metaphor. I started life on third base at Adobe because they've been doing so well with us. It's just getting us that next mile. And what they had done is they had input a goal to be carbon neutral by 2015. And when I walked in the door in 2013, they had purchased unbundled renewable energy credits and offsets to take pretty much the last mile to carbon neutrality. And I looked at that and I said, this is pretty interesting a few years ago, but this makes no sense now. We need to do the real deal. We need to invest in true grid-scale renewable energy, not buy offsets and make a really terrific marketing claim. So I pulled all the wording for that. We never made the claim. We never reported it in CDP. And I don't want to be judgmental about this sort of thing, but the way that I look at it is we can do better. And the way to do that is investing in true renewable energy PPAs and not purchasing offsets to make a claim. There's one last piece to this too. If you think about it on an economic scale, in order to purchase offsets to make that claim, you have to set aside funds. So you do the best you can, you do great, and then that last mile you pay extra money for it. That is a really poor economic decision. Renewable energy should cost less. Once it's installed, you don't have to extract anything. It's producing for the next 15 years. So you can stabilize your operating expenses, your OPEX, across a certain term of a power purchase agreement, a renewable energy PPA. So there's a lot of good business sense to this as well. And yeah, again, speaking for the community that you're sitting in right now, I think it's working out.
Great. So maybe I'll just offer a couple final words on this, and then we'll end on time and let people eat their food.
They look hungry.
Yeah, they do look hungry. I'm getting a little nervous. But just picking up on a couple of the themes here I thought were really important. On the one hand, we're saying we don't need the help of government, but I also, and not unsurprisingly from those of our industries that are more heavily regulated, there is an element of work that needs to be done that is certainly policy work, obstacles that could be lower, markets that could be more rational, et cetera. So we've got a lot of work to do there. The other theme, and it's a related theme, is this idea of working together. And I think it's important to, for those of you in this audience who, if you're earlier in this journey, not as familiar with the work that private sector groups are doing on this, and compared, and I've only been in this work for just about 20 years, even in the last 10 years, the scale and the depth and the impact of collaboration between private sector players, government and private funders, NGOs and other entities is completely off the charts. I'd be remiss not thanking the Dutch for support of some of our activities. It's a great example. But you mentioned Future of Internet Power. We work with Royal Dutch Shell and others on the future of fuels. There are opportunities all over the place if companies show any ambition or interest where we can get funders and other entities together to share the cost, reduce the risk, share the results. There's tons of pre-competitive space. And because the goals so strongly align with what states like California and countries and others want to do, there's support to be had. So things that, we've got people working together. If you told me 10 years ago they're going to work together on this, I would have laughed. We take it for granted now. So it really is quite a bit less daunting than it may appear, and would encourage you to come up to any of these companies or myself if what we've said sparks some interest. And other than that, unless the organizers have another announcement for me, I think we're released to food, correct? Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Actually, no.
We have one slide. Thank you so much, you guys. We appreciate it. Actually, we've got one slide we wanted to put up while we have all your attention. And that was which ideas and concepts of this idea of climate business appeals to you the most. So if you can go in and put in some answers and vocabulary in there, we'd appreciate it. And one last thing, we're coming back at 2:30 for lunch, so you have about an hour. And make sure to check out the showcases outside. There's a lot of good companies out there, and there's thematic lunches where you can exchange business cards. So we'll see you all back in about an hour. Welcome back. Does everyone feel better? Got some food in your stomachs? We're also back on time, which is very exciting. So we've got a great afternoon scheduled for you today. First, we're going to hear some scene-setting remarks from some thought leaders like Nicholas Cohn from TomTom, Guus Velders with the Netherlands Institute for Public Health, and Adair Turner, the chairman of the Energy Transmission Commission. And then we're going to break out into 3 sessions where we're going to take a deep dive into specific topics. Climate smart mobility, that's going to be in Hawthorne. The energy revolution, that's going to be in Cyprus. And financing the transition session, and that's going to be in Prince. And then after that, we'll come back together and we'll talk about how to take all these learnings forward and what types of actions and partnerships are going to be successful to create this energy transition. And then we'll end the day with Matt Rodriguez, and Secretary for Environmental Protection for California EPA. And just before we jump into the scene-setting remarks, we're going to have a short video to kick off the afternoon. We're going to hear from Andrew Steer, the director of the World Resources Institute. The WRI is a research organization whose mission is to move human society to live in ways that protect Earth's environment. So that's going to be a short video that you'll check out. So enjoy.
Hello, it's a pleasure to join you, and I'm sorry it's just by film. I'd much rather be there in the flesh with you out there in California and together with our friends from the Netherlands. We have a deep relationship here at the World Resource Institute, obviously with a lot of you out in California, but also with the Dutch government. And it's great to know that Minister Sharon Dijksma is out with you now, and we'd love to be with you there, Sharon, too, and I do apologize. Look, there's a real battle going on, isn't there? It's a battle for what kind of future we're going to have, and you are at the very frontiers of that. And I want to commend you for what you're doing both in California and the Netherlands. In many ways, this battle has become so clear in the last couple of weeks. Just think about, we've had 1,000 companies writing to the Trump administration saying, for heaven's sake, please stay in the Paris climate deal. And at the same time, we've had the administration, led by the president, of course, on his 100th-day speech, saying if we stay in the Paris deal, it will cost this economy $2.5 trillion. That's a lot of money. Now, if he's right, why would 1,000 companies say, let's stay in? And of course, they can't both be right. So where did Mr. Trump get his numbers from? Well, he got them from an economic model that the Heritage Foundation and others sort of been working on. And it basically assumes that the United States private sector is stodgy, non-imaginative, and is not going to keep developing new technologies. It's not nimble. It's not flexible. That's the assumption. They assume that, for example, the price of renewable energy won't keep falling. They assume that the private sector won't be able to respond to new signals and new requests, won't be able to go after those incredible export opportunities that are going to come because other countries are moving to a green path. So if you have a very low view of initiative and innovation in this country, then Mr. Trump is right. But of course, we don't have this view, and nor do you, and you're demonstrating that every single day. Here at the World Resources Institute, we've been very centrally involved in the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate. This has been something that was set up 3 years ago, has a lot of former heads of state, finance ministers, mayors, top economists, working on the issue of economic growth. These are not environmentalists. We had Nobel Prize winners in economics as part of this. And their question was, can we move from today's high carbon, low efficiency world economy to tomorrow's high efficiency, low carbon world economy in a way that doesn't require us to pay a huge price in the short term in terms of costs and in terms of jobs. And after a year and a half, they came out with a really compelling report that they've now built upon with many other examples to say, yes, actually, that can happen. We can do that. And there's 3 reasons for this. First, if you follow smart climate policies, you will promote more resource efficiency. Second, if you follow smart climate policies, you will promote more technology, so-called induced technological change, and there's a huge sort of empirical literature on that now. And third, if you follow clear climate policies, you will provide clarity and predictability to long-term policies for developing for investors. And at the moment, of course, private companies in this country don't know whether they're following a high carbon path or a low carbon path, so they have to straddle the two. They delay their investment decisions, and all in all, investment is lower, and so is growth. So smart policies can lead to more technology, more competitiveness, more jobs, and of course, a much better planet. Now, this message is spreading around the world, striking that the same week that the US administration announced that it was eviscerating environmental policies, the government of China announced another $360 billion of investment in renewable energy, and the decision not to go ahead with 140 coal-powered electricity generating plants that had been planned. And so too, Prime Minister Modi, having inherited 3 gigawatts of solar energy, he said, I'm going to go to 100 gigawatts by 2022. The most rapid increase in solar energy anywhere in the world. Now, he didn't do that because he's a member of the Sierra Club. He did that because he believes that his economy needs to grow. And he's right. And what he was saying essentially is, look, this is not just some incremental change. This is actually disruptive change. This is a new industry. There's going to be factories. There's going to be universities, technology, investment, jobs. So get ready to act. And of course, then the business community sees, yes, this is a path. And we've got to think about disruptive change. We've got to move from this path to this path. And of course, that is not difficult to do. It requires real leadership, disruptive leadership. That is precisely what you guys are trying to do out in California, and what the Europeans and the Dutch leaders in this field are doing. So I simply want to thank you for your efforts and encourage you to stay the course. And it's an honor for us at the World Resource Institute to be your friend and supporter and engaged partner in this process. Thank you very much indeed.
All right, next up, we're going to start on the scene-setting remarks. And I'd like to welcome Nicholas Cohn to the stage. He's the Strategic Manager for Business Development of TomTom, and he's going to talk about how the navigation and mapping company is helping customers move towards zero carbon economy. Sound about right?
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I think it's very tough for me to come after the inspiring remarks of Minister Dijksma and Governor Brown, but it's also tough for you to come here after lunch. So I'll do my best and just get to the point. I work here for TomTom in California after 10 years working in our Amsterdam headquarters. And because we are in the transportation industry, everything we do matters for climate change. And every way that we might influence the way that people use their vehicles, the way that businesses use their vehicles, and how we can provide better information not only to those moving on the road networks, but also to those managing the road networks. In the 10 years since we introduced connected navigation, our industry has changed. I would just like to, we started out as a really consumer company. That has changed completely from 95% of our revenue being aftermarket navigation devices sold at consumer electronic stores. That's now a much smaller percentage, and our big customers are automotive OEMs. They are government agencies, they are smartphone companies, and fleets. We are aware of our responsibility and of the influence that we can have, but we're also aware that we need to be in touch with what's happening with the mobility market. Otherwise, we will lose the market. One of the things that we do is get involved. One of the networks here in California and in the Netherlands that we're linked into is the Coast to Coast Smart Mobility Organization. That's managing director of Caltrans with the Vice President Post from North Holland, which is the location of our headquarters, working together to push this agenda forward, and we're proud to be part of that. Looking at what California is really leading in, at least in my eyes, air quality. So we have been focusing on helping logistics firms, drivers, reduce the amount of fuel they use. Traffic information, accurate traffic information, not only for managing the networks, but for reducing delay. That's also something that we have been creating for 10 years. We do it to help individuals. Obviously, the state of California and other road authorities are doing it to help everyone and optimize the network to reduce energy use, reduce delay. EVs, that's also something that we want to help people use EVs and make it a more seamless experience. And autonomous driving, we're making maps for autonomous driving. It's something that California is also leading in many ways, legislatively, but also in terms of industry. We're creating those products not because necessarily California is leading in those, but because that is a joint vision of where mobility is heading. That's what the market is. So that is what we're doing. But I think it's also the fact that we realize that we can't do it alone. It's an ecosystem that's becoming tighter and tighter in terms of its not only interoperability but interdependence. We have to work together to reach these goals. I also see what's happening in the market is that the public, the traveling public, wants to use these innovations. And that's in the end how we're going to get there. California is going to double in population. We are traveling more than ever before, so we have to find ways of doing it efficiently. And that's creating markets and actually creating opportunities. These are just some quick wins, but the fact that there was a recent survey in the Bay Area, people want to leave, partly because of housing costs, but also because of traffic. That means there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure to make change, but there are also choices people are making in the market, which are stimulating companies like us to make this change go faster. And in the end, we are also convinced that if we can reduce travel times for individuals, we can reduce energy use and reduce emissions, we're creating economic opportunities for everybody. We're lowering the cost profile of, for example, the Bay Area, but also everywhere, and improving the economy. There's a lot of talk about what changes autonomous vehicles are going to bring. I'm convinced personally that safety is going to be a big benefit. I'm not convinced that we're going to automatically have reduced VMT, reduced energy use. My friend Robin Chase has been quoted a lot saying, well, it's going to be heaven or hell. I think one thing we need to keep in mind is some really basic principles are still going to be playing. So we learned in the 70s if we add asphalt, we add freeways, we add lanes, they fill up, they generate more travel, they don't solve congestion in a structural way. We cannot build our cities out of congestion. So if we think that autonomous vehicles are going to solve congestion because we're packing more vehicles into the same network, I think that's an illusion. I think we need to think further and plan better and influence what's going to happen and how they're going to be used. And we have to do it in a market-driven way. Otherwise, no, it won't work. So we really want to work more and more with, obviously, other industry partners, but with road authorities, with everyone working at a local and state level to figure out where can we save energy, how can we link signals and our traffic management programs into the driver more effectively, how can we make a more seamless and efficient system. So that's really my focus, but it's also why I'm proud to be here preaching to the converted. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. And now I'm going to invite to the stage Guus Velders. I know I'm saying your name horribly wrong, but I'm trying really hard. He's the senior scientist for air quality and climate change for the Netherlands Institute for Public Health. And Time magazine recently named him one of the top 100 most influential people. And Leonardo DiCaprio wrote about him in Time and his contribution to the understanding of climate science. So we're excited to hear from you today.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you for having me here. I'd like to tell my personal experience over the past decade, how I think science, policymakers, and industry can influence each other and make things happen. That's my main story. This is not the right button. That's the right button. If you see, I will bring you to some science. You see the temperature graph over the past decades. You can clearly see the increase in temperatures. No mistake, this is really happening in the world. If you look at the last couple of years, 2014 was the warmest year on record. 2015 was even much warmer. 2016 was even warmer again. So records are broken every year, and not only on the global average, also in different regions. I believe last year, 9 out of the 12 months were the warmest on record over the past centuries. So clearly, temperature change is a very real thing. And we see change happening everywhere. Science shows you that we see flooding everywhere in many places. At the same time, we see droughts. Well, drought is very common in California now, but here, when you're rich, you can cope with it. But especially if you go to Africa, drought is a very serious issue. Sea level rise, very big concern, of course, for the Netherlands, which is also a very big concern for me, I think, and a very prominent signal of climate change is the melting of the Arctic sea ice. For me, that's a very clear signal that something really profound is happening. And I think a subject which is not much appreciated, that's also the ocean acidification. CO2 levels increasing in the atmosphere, CO2 levels increase in the oceans, and they will break down the shells in the ocean and also the corals. I think that's an underappreciated subject, which if you go to things like climate engineering, you cannot manage. It's really the CO2 which is happening and which is affecting the food chain in the oceans. It was mentioned before during one of the talks, UN Sustainable Development Goals. I think that it's a very nice framework which brings together the actions as a world we have to do. And if you see now, we have the bottom right, it switched immediately. The bottom right, we show the climate change figure. Bottom left, sorry. But climate change is linked to many other features. It's linked to food production, to clean energy, to water quality, to sea level rise, and also to safety in the world. So it's linked with a lot of different subjects. It's not only the climate change itself, it's also air quality and a lot of subjects. So I think it's really binding and really affecting a lot of areas. Oh, it switches immediately always. My message is we don't need only science and policy. No, we need people who take action. We need motivated scientists. We need leading politicians who take action. And we need entrepreneurs who are here from industry who can take the action. This combination of people, of scientists, industrial people, and politicians, they can make things happen. And I can bring you my personal story over the past couple of years, by which time has honored me. If you look at the Montreal product, oh, sorry, one step further. So we have to take coordinated action. It's everything's together. If you look at the atmosphere, it's one atmosphere we're living in. We cannot separate things. If we emit compounds which are bad for the ozone layer, they can also be bad for climate change and can be bad for air pollution. So if you go to clean transport, clean energy, it's good for air pollution. If you go to the forest, forests are very important as a sink for CO2, but also for managing forest is good for your air pollution. Agriculture is a subject which is also linked to climate change and air pollution, which is much harder to tackle. It has both effects on air pollution, as methane emissions, nitrous oxide emissions, which are all integrated, linked to air pollution and climate change. But it's also linked so closely to the food production that it's much harder to tackle than some of the other subjects. So my personal experience is that if you look at the Montreal Protocol, I've been working on the protocol for the past 20 years, and not many people know it, the Montreal Protocol is for the protection of the ozone layer. It was signed in 1987, and two people were very instrumental for this. It was Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Two unlikely people, if you look at this. But the reason was, as I understand it, Margaret Thatcher was a chemist. So she could understand that small amounts polluted in the atmosphere could go to catalytic reactions and could destroy the ozone layer. And what I heard, Ronald Reagan had skin cancer. So ozone layer depletion gives you more UV radiation and can cause skin cancer. So he's very aware of the threats of ozone layer depletion. So two unlikely people, in our sense, were very instrumental in this global agreement. And here also you saw the big role that both science played, industry played, and policymakers. And if you saw now, in the 1970s and 1980s, it started out first with the public attention. When Molina and Rodin, two American scientists here in California, discovered that the CFCs could deplete the ozone layer, then there was public action, both in Europe and in the US. People just didn't buy spray cans anymore, because it was known that they were bad for the ozone layer. So there was no policy, no industry action, just public attention, public awareness. Later that was followed by the policy response and industry actions. And now if you see the left panel there, you can see that the concentration of all ozone-depleting substances everywhere, they're all going down in the atmosphere. Really a direct response of the policy action and of industry actions. And it's not by coincidence I showed the right picture there. This is what CFCs are now mostly used for. At least not CFCs anymore, it's now a different chemical. And what happened with the ozone layer depletion, so CFCs were banned because they were bad for the ozone layer. Industry started using HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons. And the whole wall of their air conditioning, they all contain HFCs. HFCs are good because they don't deplete the ozone layer, but they're strong greenhouse gases. And that's what we brought to the public attention and to the policy attention about a decade ago. And again here, industry and policymakers took action. And this is, I think, a very nice example, again, how scientists, policymakers, and industry work together. Because in Kigali last year, in October, there was a global treaty which is fulfilling part of the climate change agreement. This graph on the right here, I made during the final hours of the negotiation, in the middle of the night, when the negotiations were finalized. I projected there that without any agreement, the HFCs could contribute to climate change up to 0.5 degrees Celsius. And with climate change, or with the Kigali Amendment, that drops down to less than 0.1 degrees Celsius. So a huge gain. You have to compare that gain of up to 0.5 degrees Celsius with the target of the Paris Agreement, which is 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. So this is a big chunk and gives you a concrete action following the Paris Agreement. So my main story is, I think, working together by people, motivated scientists, visionary politicians, and industry people like you here, we can make things happen also for climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And also thank you for your climate science work. We need more people like you out there. Next, we're going to hear a brief video from Adair Turner, Chairman for the Energy Transition Commission. That's a group of leaders from public, private, and social sectors. And the group is looking to accelerate change towards low-carbon energy systems. And right after the video, I'll tell you a little bit more about the breakout sessions, which we'll go to.
Good morning. It's great to have this chance to send a video message, and I'm sorry I can't be with you there in person. I've been asked to talk about the key findings of the Energy Transition Commission, and I'll try to link them to the themes of your conference, the huge business opportunity in dealing with climate change. The Energy Transition Commission, ETC, brings together a very diverse range of members, including some whom you wouldn't necessarily expect always to be able to agree. We have major environmental NGOs, but also major fossil fuel and natural resource companies, major renewable power companies, and major banks and asset managers, and industrial companies from the steel, automotive, and process engineering industries. But these diverse members are united around two beliefs. First, that we must deliver the increased energy supply which developing countries need to drive economic and social progress. And second, that we must meet the Paris objective of keeping global warming to well below 2 degrees, which means halving global carbon emissions by around 2040 and reaching net zero later this century. That's a huge challenge, but we are certain it can be achieved. And we describe how in our first major report, which is called Better Energy, Greater Prosperity, which we launched last month. Meeting the challenge requires us to achieve 4 major energy transitions. First, we must decarbonize electricity and electrify as much of the economy as possible. And here we are very confident that this can be done faster and cheaper than seemed likely only a few years ago. Now, obviously, we all know, particularly in California, about falling wind and solar costs. But the question is, what do we do when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine? But in this report, we argue that it will be possible, at the very latest by the 2030s, and probably well before, to build power systems which are near total renewables, delivering over 90% of electricity from renewable sources with total costs, including all the costs of backup, fully competitive with fossil fuel generation. And that's a key message not only for California, where you are already headed down that path, but in countries like India, where our report and others are already beginning to make the government doubt whether it needs the big coal investments previously assumed. As we decarbonize electricity supply, we should then electrify as much as possible. And in the report, we describe the huge opportunities to do so in autos, in building heating systems, and in many industrial processes. In total, we believe that clean electrification, decarbonising power supply, and electrifying as much economic activity as possible can deliver half of the carbon emissions required by 2040. And it will, of course, create huge opportunities for business in solar, in wind, in batteries, in electric cars, but also in the many other technologies such as power demand control and pricing systems, which are required if we're to use electricity more intelligently than in the past. So clean electrification is vital, but also far from sufficient, because there are many sectors which we can't electrify at all, or at least for the foreseeable future, only at exorbitant cost. Sectors such as aviation, long-distance trucking, steel and cement production. So the second key transition that we need to achieve is decarbonisation beyond power. And the precise way forward is unclear. So here our report is a wake-up call to governments and to industries, companies, that we need to design the way forward and make the investments required to drive this second key transition. And over the next year, the ETC is going to concentrate on how precisely to do that. But here again, the business opportunities will be huge and the prize very large for the first to develop the key technologies and processes. The third transition, required transition, is a revolution in the pace of energy productivity improvement, getting more income, more prosperity out of each unit of energy service delivered, increasing the annual pace of productivity improvement from around 1.7% per annum to more like 3% per annum. And here again, a lot of what we need to do is clear. More energy efficient appliances, better HVAC systems, better building control and insulation, and more intelligent urban design. And here too, the business opportunities are huge. Indeed, arguably, they're even greater than in renewable energy. Because when we worked out how much additional investment the world needs to achieve a low-carbon economy, the biggest increases in billions of dollars are not, in fact, in solar farms or gigafactories to build batteries, huge though those are, but in the multiple products and new building structures required if we're to use energy more efficiently. The final transition involves cutting fossil fuel use and optimizing fossil fuel use. 70% less coal across the world by 2040, 30% less oil, but as much gas used across the world as it is today, which of course poses huge challenges for fossil fuel producers, but also requires significant investment in, for instance, gas infrastructure. So overall, we are setting out a challenging but also optimistic story, because the transitions required are technologically possible, and in one crucial area, renewable power, dramatic change is already occurring and simply needs to be reinforced. And we know the policies and sorts of investments required to drive equally vital change across the other transitions. Business, of course, has a key role to play in driving those transitions, but for many businesses, the economic and profit opportunities will also be huge. So I hope that's given you some idea of the key messages coming out of the Energy Transition Commission, and I hope sometime soon to be able to be in California discussing them with you rather than simply appearing over a video. Thank you very much.
All right, now it's time to go to the breakout sessions. We've got 3 topics: climate mobility, and that looks at new ways and new technologies for more sustainable transportation, and leaders like Hyperloop One, Allego, and the TNO Netherlands organizations. And the second one is energy revolution. Sorry, climate mobility is in room, Hawthorne, there it is, it's right in front of me. The energy revolution, that's in Cyprus, and that looks at the energy transition, transition from fossil fuels to clean energy, looks at how business and policy are going to transform that. And the third one, financing the transition, in room Prince, and that's looking at new ways to finance the low carbon economy, and that has leaders from California State Treasurer, a Climate Policy Initiative, and the Climate Disclosure Project. So head to those rooms, and we'll come back after about an hour and talk about what we've learned. All right, we hope that those breakout sessions were very fruitful this afternoon. If you would kindly take your seats, then we'll go through the rest of the program. And we're going to talk about what we learned in the sessions. All right. And if you're in the back standing and looking for a seat, feel free to come up to the front. Try to fill this in a little bit. And we appreciate you being here, because we know it's been a lot of content today, a lot of great content, but a lot of things discussed. And we appreciate you sticking around to the very end. All right. All right, so in our final session, we're going to kick it off briefly by hearing from a pitch from an innovative startup. There was a startup competition yesterday organized by the Netherlands government, and amongst a group of startups, there was 2 that were selected as the best applicants. They looked at scalability and ability to reduce emissions by the company's innovations. And those companies are EV4 and SEIS. EV4 unfortunately had to step away, so they're not here to present, but they do battery-based charging stations for electric cars. They're based in Portland, Oregon. So check them out online, that's EV4. And then the other company who is going to pitch today, Leo Vandevin, if he's in the audience, we invite you to come on up. He's going to tell you about his company, SEIS, and they recycle auto tires and turn them into goods like green roofs. So he's going to talk to you a little bit about that.
Hello. Hello, my name is Leo van Dongen. I'm the CEO, the Circular Economy Officer from SAIS, from the company SAIS. SAIS is a consultancy firm specialized in tire recycling business. SAIS' mission is to revolutionize tire recycling in the circular economy, in combination with small-scale recycling. We have engineered a new closed-loop solution. Starting from a waste tire to infill for artificial turf, and from worn artificial turf to upcycled rubber granules, and to a green roof drainage solution, making waste rubber, or waste tire rubber, circular for more than 100 years. This closed-loop solutions, we also supplied the needed small-scale equipment. We developed the gator box, the tire box, the turf box, and in development is the roof cat box. These containerized solutions consist of a few 20 to 30-foot sea containers. The roof cat box will be produced a high-quality drainage panel for the green roofs named the Roof Catalyst. How green are green roofs? Two professors of the University of British Columbia in Canada concluded, in general, air pollution due to the production of existing plastics in drainage system can be balanced for green roof or by green roofs in 13 to 32 years. It's evident that the current green roof materials need to be replaced by a more environmental friendly and sustainable product. The green roof drainage layer is made of 100% upcycled rubber out of artificial turf, used artificial turf. Currently, these green roof drainage products are made of recycled plastic and needed to be replaced by a more environmental friendly and sustainable product because of the high CO2 pollution. The Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries and the Recycling Research Institute describes using recycled rubber in molded products creates a smaller by factor of up to 20 times less carbon footprint compared to using recycled plastics. Due to this CO2 footprint, the product Roof Catalyst can be balanced in 3 till 6 years instead of 13 to 32 years. The Green Roof for Healthy Cities in the USA reported that 2 million square meters of green roofs being constructed in 2016 and 100 million square meters will be installed in 2022, while billions of square meters are available. While in North Europe and North America the market is mature, the rest of the world is in the early stage and finding out the benefits of green roofs. This concept can be used worldwide, and our focus is on the megacities. According to the data of the World Bank, and transport accounts more than 20% of the global CO2 emission. Therefore, it is important to recycle and produce locally. One of the key strategies of the United States Green Building Lead is the use of local and regional materials. Yes, end-of-life rubber is available everywhere, and the need for real green roofs is booming. That was my pitch. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Leo. Can we buy these now? Are they in commercial production?
Yes.
Yes. All right, so go to their website and check that out. All right. All right, we've got the second to last session for you. And in this session, we're going to chat about what we talked about today, what we learned, actions we need to take, takeaways, behavior changes, and reflections on the day. So I wanted to bring up our panelists for that. Alexa, Marcel, and Debbie, if you want to come up.
Thanks.
Put you in the middle? I mean,
No.
I need to go boy, girl. All right, and particularly these folks were brought together to listen to everyone today because they represent different levels of government, and we wanted different government perspectives. Debbie Raphael represents the city of San Francisco, so she can talk about from a local perspective. Alexa Kleisterer from the California Environmental Protection Agency, and Marcel Bokabu, I'm going to get that wrong, but you can say it. Yeah, Marcel, climate envoy from the Netherlands. So they're going to talk about their perspective and what they learned. So let's start with the first one. What are the most important messages that you heard today throughout the day from both the audience and from speakers? Debbie, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I have to thank the Netherlands for putting this on and for the amazing, powerful nature of the speakers. I just kept getting blown away at how impressive each speaker was. I think the biggest challenge for me today was the pronunciation of names. So as I say what I've heard, forgive me. So I apologize. So as a local government person here on the West Coast, where we are sort of think of ourselves as the bubble inside the bubble being California and the San Francisco Bay Area is the bubble inside that bubble. And especially with what's going on in DC, we feel very isolated sometimes. So I was really happy that Frank Elderson from the Netherlands Bank actually read the US Constitution and reflected on that. That was impressive. Yes, thank you for that. So I heard some things that were really common, and they were commonalities from across the globe and across perspectives. So I want to just reflect on them because they're things I think about every day when I go to work. Governor Brown started us off talking about this need that is going to take all parties and institutions if we're going to solve this problem. And he talked about this challenge and response, and how the example of the LA air quality presented a challenge that scientists could understand and articulate that then led to an appropriate policy response. And here's where I'm going to really screw up the pronunciation, but Roos, did I say it? I'm not even close. Okay, sorry.
I did the same thing.
He knew it was him. So he talked about, just like Governor Brown did, but in a little different way, this trifecta of politicians, businesses, and the citizenry, and how it takes all of them together to actually shift the needle. And I thought the really interesting point he made was that the citizenry piece is so important. So you can start with the scientific community pointing out a problem and showing you the data, but sometimes it's that public response that then stimulates policy that then leads to industry response. And I think it's really important for all of us here to not forget that public response piece, whether or not you are a scientist working in your lab and the importance of you getting your information out, or whether you're in government and the policymaker to mobilize that public cry so that we can in fact move the needle as policymakers and have industry come on board. And finally, Amory Lovins, I thought gave us a hint on how to do that. Because nowadays it feels very separate here, less so in Europe, but more in the US, in this divide between industry and policymakers, and a huge distrust by the public. So how are we going to bridge that? And I think he gave us the solution when he said, we need to focus on outcomes, not motives. I thought that was a really interesting piece of advice, because his point is that solutions are what going to unite us. So that is something I took away as a very thoughtful approach to the way I want to do my work going forward.
All right, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone, and I would like to echo the thanks to the government of the Netherlands for really pulling this event together. It's been very impressive, just an impressive list of speakers and this engagement, and the fact that there are this many people in the room at this hour is a testament to how exciting this and interesting this event has been. So my deepest thanks to all of you who helped organize this event, and those of you who came. So I think my biggest takeaway that I've heard today, I think, is kind of music to a state worker's ears, which is that we don't need help from the government. We need rules to catalyze those best solutions. And I think that's really the way in California that we see ourselves. We really are those catalysts, those who are here to catalyze, not necessarily with the stick beating people over the head, but really to create policy that fosters innovation and that fosters change and that fosters those, in this case, GHG emissions reductions at the lowest cost possible and in the most efficient way possible. So I think that as I said is music to our ears, because that I really think is where we walk the talk in California. And I think anywhere that you look from the world on California or even from the country, California walks the talk on those policies that do catalyze the best solutions. So just in my panel earlier, we were hearing about SB 350. And the Renewable Portfolio Standard that has moved recently from 33% to now 50% by 2030, with a goal to double energy efficiency also by 2030. And now there's even legislation and ideas of moving that target towards 100%. So the ideas keep coming, those policy ideas keep coming, and I think we just need to keep leading the way there. And this ties back to also Mr. Elderson's comment about the target year that was set for energy efficiency, and how once that target was set, everybody falls in line and action happens. So I think that's where we are. We are those who want to set those targets and set that aspiration that action can then occur under there. I think what I also heard was the importance of messaging. And sharing this California story, I think now more than ever is obviously very important. And that's also something that we prioritize and really take to heart, that now more than ever, I mean, I think even previous to this administration, but now more than ever, when we attend meetings in the US, but obviously even more so internationally, people are looking to California and saying, how can you provide that assurance and that momentum that we need to keep the Paris Agreement alive, for example, and to keep other countries engaged. I think recently we've seen very positive signals from India and China, just even at this last negotiation session last week in Germany. They are sending signals that they're doubling down, moving faster than anybody ever thought that they could on their renewable targets. And policy targets, and so we need to take that to heart, but we need to keep that message alive, that California is not backing down, not now, not ever. We're all in, as messages we've heard from the governor and from state officials in California that we are moving ahead and not backing down. So I think it's our job to continue with those messages, sharing them not only, as we heard today, in the world, but also with other states. We just heard about Virginia also, which I think is a very promising case where Governor McAuliffe, he's a Democrat, but working with a very highly Republican legislature around him, he has taken a step forward and found that bold leadership to direct his agencies to work on emissions trading. So I think we see a lot of positive steps. We know that California can lead the way. We also heard, I think, the last point is that we need to bring investors along with us, right? We need you all by our sides when we go out to talk to Virginia or Colorado or Pennsylvania or to other countries, Colombia, countries in Africa, even in Europe that may have doubts of what's happening here. We need you by our side, so that's not just us telling them that we're moving ahead, but that they see these transformative examples. So that's where I'll stop.
Yeah, let me not echo the thanks to the Netherlands. That would be a bit odd. Let me complement that with thanks to you, California, and the city of San Francisco, and of course also you from Sacramento, for organizing this with us and underscoring the importance of the issue. and you asked me what strikes me today, or what do I take away from this one, is that is the first observation, that we pull this off in a few weeks basically, and you get a room full of people that are interested. We got a lot of cameras, we got the governor in the room, so we are on to something, and that is, I think, important to realize. And in my role, I often get to rooms full of people that come to a meeting or a conference with the word climate in the headline. And one of the speakers said it today as well, you're preaching to the converted. Maybe that's true, but there's a lot of value in meetings like today, because you sometimes need a safe landing platform to work from. And what we have done today here is that, talk to each other, and this group is growing all the time, but also take away messages, sharpen your messages, and also learn what kind of questions to ask going forward. And as we sit here, we are 3 government levels, and that is another observation here today. It matters how you use your zoom lens. What level of zooming do you apply? If you would have looked at the panel right before the break, an all-male panel, you would have thought only male in this panel, that's not good, you know? You need a mix of females, male. But if you zoom out and you include this panel, the average is getting better. And that same observation you can have on many of the climate issues. I use an example of TomTom. The speaker spoke about the way traffic will change the years to come. But he kept on asking questions. Is this indeed the way? Do we have to work with existing patterns and only make the density on the roads bigger? He said, no, actually, you have to move beyond that, or, in my word, zoom out and look at it differently. Kind of think also of the occupancy of cars and all kinds of other questions that you can ask. So another example on that same zooming level came from the breakout session I was on finance. A representative from the California Treasury spoke about the green bonds and the effect green bonds have on climate. And he had a short conclusion, actually not that much, because they are just a different way of financing already existing projects. He counterbalanced that with the example from China that divest from polluting coal plants and invest in more environmentally friendly still coal plants. The gain for climate there is bigger than the green bonds in California. So again, it matters to what level you zoom in or zoom out and what kind of benefits you see for climate. Just to complement with one more observation of today, and I think it was mentioned by several speakers today, including the Governor and Minister Dijksma. Also Andrew Steer, I think, spoke about it. Leadership, the role of leadership. I think Andrew Steer called it disruptive leadership. That is one thing that we, I think, share in this room. And I want to illustrate that with Guus Velders, that's how you say it, who was mentioned by Time in top 100 of leaders in this field of climate. And Guus doesn't have leadership in his job description. The governor and the minister have that. But what I want to say with this is that leadership is not necessarily the same as your job description. You lead by example, you lead on the work you do, and I think that is something that we all have in common here. We work on this issue, we believe in this issue, and we constantly work to advance with new ideas, looking from a different angle. So finally, I share the optimism, I think, with which the governor also concluded his speech. We are definitely onto a road towards a sustainable future.
And we'd like to welcome you to submit your thoughts. What's your top takeaway to that website, pollev.com/CIBB, or text CIBB to 22333. We'd love to collect your thoughts and what you learned throughout the day as well. One thing I thought was particularly interesting, I don't know exactly what this means, but I didn't hear the actual words of Donald Trump until I got into my breakout session earlier. I don't know what that says, if we're a very optimistic bunch, or maybe maybe we're angry enough that we're trying to kind of block that out. But anyway, so we would like to talk about some forward-looking things. What are the actions that you talked about today that you think will be crucial to taking this to the next level? What kind of changes or behavior changes need to happen? What kind of actions should we be on the path of for 2018? Debbie, why don't we start with you again? Yeah.
Okay. So I think the importance of, I'm very inspired by my fellow panelists too, the importance of leadership and setting goals is incredibly key. I know in San Francisco we're not afraid of setting goals, and those goals drive us. Whether or not we get there, we're not so sure sometimes, but at least we have put our foot forward. We have our climate action strategy is summarized in 4 goals, if you will, in a way. 0, 50, 100 routes. 0, 50, 100 routes. Zero waste, that's zero waste incineration and landfill. 50% of trips in sustainable modes out of single occupancy vehicles. 100 is 100% renewable energy, and that's not just electricity, that's fuel switching. And roots is supporting carbon sequestration by healthy soils, using our compost that we have in our Zero initiative to radically change the soil dynamics for carbon sequestration, and of course greening. So those are goals that we have set for ourselves. I think for us, the hardest part of that, and this was actually what one of the speakers said as well, is that fuel switching part. How are we going to get off of gasoline, diesel, and natural gas? That's the part of it that's the most challenging for us to figure out. How do we electrify everything? How do we do that in a way that is leapfrogging incrementalism, and in a way where business is there at the table with the economy in mind, without needing us to finance everything. So for me, what I took away from this meeting was some actual relationships and interesting things that I heard that I can't wait to follow up on. One is the area of renewable jet fuel. I had a wonderful conversation with KLM out there to talk about how do we get San Francisco Airport to be operating on all renewable jet fuel. That's something we're really committed to. We're really struggling right now with electrification and infrastructure. In my breakout session, looking at what Allgo is, did I say it right? I don't know. Is Allego, that E, I wasn't sure what to do with that E. Allego and their charging plazas, that kind of thinking of how we're going to take existing buildings, which is a real problem, and figure out how we electrify all the parking spaces so that we can have a way to take advantage of the new vehicles that are coming to market and the incentives that the state of California is going to be putting forward, as well as some of the settlement money that VW is contributing to our state. There's lots of opportunities for us. So for me, the next steps for all of us is to set those bold goals, to find the partners who have some of the technology, and then as Kofi Annan said, he said, we have the technical expertise we need to solve the world's problems. What we're lacking is the political will. And so I think what we need to do in this room is join together when we've got those technologies and we've got areas that want to take advantage of them. How do we work together to create the political will? That is the key piece that's going to drive us forward and engage the public, engage the private sector, engage the public sector, and show the world what's possible. I just want to end on one thing that Minister Dijkstra said. She said it's no longer a conversation of must we do this? It's we can do this. So we've shifted. It's not a whether conversation, it's a how conversation. And there's so much knowledge in this room to answer that question, and that's a question that we can answer today.
Alexa?
Great, thank you. So next steps, how do we take this forward? I think I won't dwell too much on the California policy level, because clearly we have set our targets. We have ambitious policies and ambitious targets that related that will get us there in terms of renewable energy, zero emission vehicles, low carbon fuel standards, energy efficiency. What I'd like to focus on is a little bit 2018. You mentioned, Kitty, is a critical moment, and I think it really is a critical moment, not just because of the midterm elections, but more looking internationally. and that's a space that I engage in from the perspective of the California EPA. 2018 is a critical moment in the world, and that's because the UNFCCC climate change negotiations will come back, all of the parties will come back to the table in 2018 to really look at their first NDCs, their nationally determined contributions that they put on the table in Paris for the Paris Agreement. And this will be the first time when they look back and look at how they've implemented them and then have to look forward. And so, that look forward is actually what's going to inform them when they have to come back to the table in 2020 and enhance their ambition, right? We're not on track to meet the 2-degree target and definitely not the 1.5-degree target that we've set out in Paris. And so we need more ambition on the table, and we need it now. So I think in that context, California is really looking to play an important role. And I think what I've learned here is that we have a lot of great allies in the room to send that message. So there are 2 things that California works on that I wanted to mention that I think will have a huge incidence on that 2018 moment. The first is the Under 2 Coalition. So in California, we have, we now, since 2015 and pre-Paris, we work with 170 subnational jurisdictions. So at the state, city, regional level, but also with national endorsers to set, who have committed to a science-based target of 80 to 95% reductions by 2050, below 1990. So we have now 170 jurisdictions that are on board with us in 33 countries, representing over 1 billion people. And we really, I think the goal now is to start working with them to transfer a lot of these policies and to have these conversations with you all, bring business to the table and show them that your economy can grow while your emissions are going down, right? So I think we need you all to transfer that message to help us, and I'm hoping to continue this conversation with a lot of you in doing that. The second, the second thing that we're thinking about in California to really influence that 2018 moment is that we are now planning to have an announcement this summer where on an event that California would organize to bring together these non-party actors and to really show momentum and transformation and all the words that we've been using today, really give amazing case studies and examples of that transformation, bring new announcements to the table, and by bringing all of these non-party actors, and by that I mean the subnationals, the private sector, civil society, by bringing all of those actors to the table in California before that conversation happens with the international negotiators, we think that we can really kind of create an impulse and catalyze more ambition to come on the table by those countries in 2018, and then to put it forward in their 2020 contribution. So again, we'll be looking to all of you very soon to come again and to capture all of these amazing examples that you've shown today, to bring new announcements to the table, and to really help us catalyze the world and keep that momentum going that we need through 2018 and 2020.
Okay, just getting back to your remark, Katie, on the name that we haven't mentioned here today. I think that's for good reasons, because if you are in this societal transition that we're in, it's like change management. And I'm sure many of you have gone through changes, reorganizations, etc. You always have a group of approximately 10% that is leading the transition, is front runners. You have 80% of followers that if you give them the right directions, they follow you, they follow the leaders. And there's 10% of people that drag their feet, have other interests and whatever. The law of change management is, or the theory is, don't spend too much time on those people that are putting their feet on the brakes. Concentrate on the leaders and concentrate on the people that want to advance with you. And I think that is the stage that we're at. We are beyond the question that we should change, and I think the colleagues here mentioned that too. So let's go forward. Don't spend too much time on the people that don't want to join us, and just build on the energy that's here in the room, but that's also, and I think many people observe that today, that energy that is out there already, and the transition is underway. So that is in reaction to that. A second thing is asked for our own role, and I think that was mentioned several times as well, we have different roles as private sector, as governments, different government levels. And what I take away from today as well is concentrate on what we can do. And several speakers in this room, but also outside, when I spoke to some of the startups and the companies, is they look at a government to sometimes repeal old legislation that is not fit for the future, or give waivers for new experiments, allow pilots and things like that. And that is something that I take away that we can do from a central government level. And that is a good resolution. And thinking of what the example that Frank Elderson gave, sometimes you just have to set a concrete deadline. You have just done that with 2018, also here in California. I think when we wrap up everything from today, we can set several targets that we want to deliver next year, or what is it, 1.5 years from now. So that is, I think, a good thing to take forward as well. Another concrete thing that I heard in the breakout session was an idea on, or a project that is already ongoing on carbon accounting for the financials. That is in its early stages. I take it upon me to see what I can do to help to take that forward. And I think there's also potential there for transatlantic cooperation, which was one of the ideas of today, to see how we can strengthen each other. That is a field that I think holds a lot of potential for changes in the field, the role that financials can play, but also accounting on the impact of your deeds and of your investments. So that is one very concrete one. Another pitch that I think I need to make, and I see the minister looking, so I have to do this, is mention the Global Center of Excellence on Climate Adaptation, an initiative that we have taken together with UN Environment and the government of Japan to set up a center like that in the Netherlands. Will be officially launched at the COP in Bonn later this year. And that is something that I think can be a vehicle to exchange experiences and information as well. And finally, what can we do collectively? Keep each other sharp, be critical to each other, come to events like this, but don't be too harsh. They're not doing that in other sectors either. Sometimes I feel we're too harsh to each other, telling, oh, that's not working. The perfect is the enemy of the good here, I think. And collectively here today, I think we can be very happy on what we achieve and what we are doing. And just, again, sharing the optimism of the governor, keep on going.
From the perspective of California and the perspective of the Netherlands, I mean, this event kind of brought together California and the Netherlands as leaders in this area, but what are some things that you think from a California's perspective we can learn from the Netherlands, and vice versa? What can the Netherlands learn from California when it comes to both clean energy economy, but also policy, were there things in your mind today that stuck out? Like we should really be doing that too.
Well, I know the secretary is going to speak about this in just a few minutes, so I don't want to go into it too much. But I think no, I mean I would just very high level. I mean I think there are a lot of similarities that we share. We're very far apart, but as Marcel just mentioned, I think adaptation is an issue that's very near and dear to both California, and to the Netherlands. Obviously, much low-lying land there, and so I think adaptation is an issue that we haven't talked about even much today. And so that's one. We don't need to just look at mitigation and renewables, energy efficiency. Those kind of ZEVs. Obviously, the zero-emission vehicles. There are so many areas where we're working on similar policies, and we can share those experiences and learn from each other. But I think we should also be looking outside that box and talking about resilience and adaptation. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I think all across the board there's a lot of things that we should be sharing best experiences on.
No, I would just like to almost echo that. I think that this is about mutual learning, and during the several conversations that we had during these days, plural, because we also visited the Bay Area and several companies, including the big ones, we have many similarities, but in the one field, California is ahead. In the other field, we have perhaps some more experience, and keep on going with that dialogue is helping both of us. And I think that the governor said it this morning also in the bilateral, which I had the privilege of sitting into, is sometimes it helps if you want to achieve something locally, that you have a friend from somewhere else that is actually helping you convince your own people to take the next steps. And that is, I think, important to know. Sometimes we're just sitting in our own place and trying to think of our own solutions. But it's not always necessary because it has been thought out on the other side of the pond. So that's one.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate your thoughts. It really helped everyone kind of digest a lot of the information we went over today.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We've reached almost the end. We have one more speaker. Who's going to give us his closing remarks and wrap up the day. That's Secretary Matt Rodriguez, Secretary for Environmental Protection with the California EPA. I'll let you take it.
Well, it's certainly not easy to follow up on all the great speakers we've had today, including the phone call from my house. I will mention, you want to talk about collaboration, that's a phone call from my house where my wife is taking care of our grandson, who is, his mother's name is Kristen Zwiedema. She's Dutch. And so I like to see that, you know, this is part of the collaboration between California and the Netherlands. Let me just say that it's very difficult to close out after all the great speakers we've had here today, and it's been a real privilege, and I really want to thank Minister Dijksma and all the representatives of the Netherlands for bringing today's event together. I look back and reflect on the first time I had a meeting with representatives from the Netherlands back in 2013. And I'll be honest, it wasn't immediately obvious to me what California and the Netherlands had in common and how we were going to work together. And that really came home when there was we were discussing something and there was a discussion of Rotterdam and events going on in Rotterdam in the 17th century. And I said, well, you know, California started in 1850, so we don't have that same history. So how can we work with the Netherlands? It wasn't immediately obvious. And then we started talking about our concern about the health of our ports and our economy, and we started talking about our concern about sea level rise. And we started talking about the necessity for our strong agricultural economies and how the Netherlands is really the responsible for fruits and vegetables for all of Europe, and California performs a similar function in the United States. And then I started thinking about, you know, there's a common spirit between our two cultures. In the sense that while the Netherlands has been there for a long time, you will hear when you talk to representatives from the Netherlands, well, we're a very small country. But they're a very small country that has shown through many, many centuries the spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation. It's a country, after all, that has reclaimed 30% of its area from the ocean. And then turn that into really its economic powerhouse, where it gets most of its GDP from this area that it has reclaimed. So they're not shy about taking on difficult subjects. Similarly, California is a state made up of immigrants, people who came to this place, to this part of the country recently. Why? Because they wanted to try new innovative ideas, because they were entrepreneurs who wanted to improve their lives. And so in California, we have a history of innovation and entrepreneurship, and you see that recently manifested in the Silicon Valley, but you see that in the history of California. So it became clear to me that we do share an awful lot. And not only that, but we shared the same goals when it came to climate change. we were going to be aggressive in dealing with climate change. And so we have the same goal for 2030. Let's reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 1990 levels. Let's really look at renewable energy. Let's really promote zero-emission vehicles, which is something that the Netherlands is really working on. And I saw that there were a number of areas where we had similar goals. So we've been working together on that vision, and the significance of an event like today is that I hear how the businesses, both in California and the Netherlands, also share that same vision. We can't do this alone. A very, very important part of the climate story is to show that you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and maintain a strong economy. And what you're hearing from the businesses today, and what I take away from the businesses today, is they're not afraid of taking on this issue of climate change. And in fact, they see it as a business opportunity. And we've seen the same thing in California. One of the things that is good about the California story, and certainly about Governor Brown's leadership, is that during this period when California has had very, very strong environmental programs, the California economy has done very well. At a period of time in 2014 when the GDP was growing by 2.1%, in the rest of the United States it was 3.1% in California. In 2015, $10 billion in venture capital came into California, and that was more than you were going to see in the rest of the country invested. And so you've seen that we've been able to take on these issues, but it's been good for the economy in California. So we have a good message. We have a good story. The Netherlands has been a great partner, and they have a great story as well. And so what we need to do is now work together to take that story and take it on the road. Frankly, we've been encouraged by the Netherlands to do that. And by taking it on the road, I mean, we can take today's message, and I will take it and talk to other states in the United States, and I will take it to the Trump administration. And we will say, this idea that somehow dealing with climate change will affect your economy, that's fallacious. That doesn't make any sense at all. In fact, you just look at what California has been able to do. You look at the fact that we've been able to join with some of the leading industrialized areas in the rest of the world, and we have a common vision on how to deal with climate change. And so don't tell us that by pursuing climate change programs, that's going to ruin the U.S. economy, because that's not true. And I can talk to some of those other states. I realize those other states have issues that are different than California. They use more coal than California. It's easy for California to say, well, let's close down coal plants because we don't rely on coal. But part of my message is, but I'm working with other states and regions around the world who share our climate policies, and they're looking at how they can wean themselves off of coal. I'm looking at companies like DSM who have recreated themselves and found a new way to be a successful company. And companies around the rest of the United States need to do that too. And so that's the message I can take away from today, and that I can share with other states and with the federal government in the days ahead. And then, as you heard from Alexa Kleistuber today, that's also a message that we want to take internationally. And again, I need to mention the fact that we were encouraged to take that story out by the Netherlands. We've had discussions with the Netherlands. They were helpful for us in getting the message of subnationals to the UN level. And you can see that in 2015 in Paris, that subnational story about how regions and cities around the world were actually doing something about climate change resonated and I think encouraged the countries around the world to get together on the Paris Agreement. As we said, there are three things that you can take out of the Under 2 coalition and our discussion with other countries and regions of the world. Those three things are: you can have aggressive policies that do work. We are reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Debbie Rafael was telling me how proud she is of San Francisco and the fact that San Francisco has grown in population, has grown in GDP, and yet has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by 28%. 28%. We're on target in California to reach our target for 2020 to get back down to 1990 levels. We're going to do that. And we're going to figure out a way to get to our target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. So we can take that message out that these programs really do work. And as I said, they work without ruining your economies. And different regions around the world that may not immediately look like they've got something in common can work together, find ways to work across the pond, work across the borders as we are with our provinces in Canada and our friends in Mexico. And various kinds of economies can come together, work together towards a common objective. So that's the message that comes out of today's meeting. I'm energized by it. The governor quotes Latin. You're not going to hear me with Latin quotes. I come out of the 60s where music was very important to me. I will also say the governor sometimes accuses me of being too optimistic. And so I don't want to minimize the challenge that we have before us. We are talking about transforming the energy base for all societies around the world. A daunting task. And yet, as I'm standing here talking to you today, there's a chorus from a song out of the 80s that runs through my head, and it says, "It's the end of the world as we know it," and I feel fine. And I feel fine because all of you are here today, and because of the message we had today, and so I just want to thank everybody for being here.
Thank you, Secretary Rodriguez, for your closing remarks. That's it. That's all we have. We want to thank everyone in the audience for being here, all the speakers, the minister, the Netherlands government for organizing everything, and Cal EPA. And there are cocktails, if I'm not mistaken, in the side room where we can mingle and chat more. But thank you. Oh, and one more note from the minister.
Yes, this was unexpected, but I need to do this. Because behind every great conference, there are even greater women. And they need to be thanked. So, first of all, obviously, I would like to thank California, you, Matt Rodriguez, also Senator Brown for hosting this, working together with the Netherlands. But there are also 3 women in my team who I think made this all possible. And somebody has said it has been organized in a few weeks. And here we are with the view on the Golden Gate Bridge with so many of you here. So I would like to thank especially, because there are a lot more, don't be angry with me or do. That doesn't matter. I want to thank 3 women, Maartje, Lenneke and Victoria. So come on out and show yourself. I see Maartje and I see Lenneke. Victoria is probably, she's here. Thank you for making this all possible, and I hope to see you at the cocktails. Thank you very much.